She didn't know his name, only that he'd pulled her from the wreckage when no one else would, then vanished into the storm. Months later, she'd learned the truth. Her savior was the most wanted man in the state, and somehow, the reason, her mother had died. This is a story about survival, trust, and the kind of love that lives in the shadows. And if you believe in stories that stay with you long after they're told, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next one. The rain wasn't falling so much as it was being thrown at the earth, sheets of it slamming sideways across the two-lane highway. Lena Tran's wipers worked in frantic arcs, but each pass only cleared the windshield for a heartbeat before the blur returned. Street lamps were few and far between out here, and the glow from her headlights was swallowed almost instantly by the dark. Her hands were tight on the wheel, the tendons in her knuckles standing out pale. She couldn't tell if the cold creeping into her fingers was from the damp air that leaked through the car's old seals or from the news she'd gotten 2 hours ago. Your mom's not doing well. Lena, you should come now. The voice on the other end, Mrs. Price, her mother's neighbor, had cracked at the end. Lena didn't ask questions, didn't wait. She'd grabbed her coat from the back of her office chair, left her laptop open on her desk, and walked straight out of the building without telling anyone where she was going. Her mother's house was 3 hours away in good weather. Tonight, the storm was turning every mile into a gamble. The radio had warned of flash floods in the county ahead, but waiting wasn't an option. She'd already missed too many moments in her mother's life, birthdays, checkups, those quiet dinners that used to stretch into hours. She wasn't going to miss this. A low rumble of thunder rolled overhead, followed by a sudden flash of lightning that lit up the slick blacktop in front of her. In that instant, she saw it, a pair of headlights barreling toward her from the opposite lane, much too close. The truck came out of the dark like a punch. Its tires screamed against the wet pavement as it swerved, and instinct had her wrenching the wheel hard to the right. The car fishtailed, hydroplaning across the flooded edge of the road. There was a deafening metallic crunch, a burst of pain, and then nothing. When sensation returned, it was fractured. Rain stinging her face, the acrid smell of gasoline, the distant sound of an engine idling somewhere, and a voice low, rough, urgent, close to her ear. Stay with me. You're getting out of here. Strong arms slid under her back and knees, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She was moving now, fast, her head against a warm, steady chest. Each footstep splashed through shallow water, and every breath from the man carrying her came deep and controlled, as if measured against the chaos around them. She wanted to see his face, to ask, "Who are you?" but her lips barely moved. The pain in her side roared up, pulling her under again. The next time her eyes opened, she was staring at a white ceiling and blinking against the harsh fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic burned her nose. She was in a hospital bed, and 4 taped to her arm, a thin blanket pulled over her legs. A young doctor stood at her side, his expression equal parts relief and disbelief. "You're lucky. 10 more minutes." And he didn't finish the sentence. Lena swallowed, her voice hoarse. "Who brought me in?" "He didn't give a name," the doctor said. "Carried you in, said you'd been in a bad accident, and left before we could ask questions." She closed her eyes and the image came back. A shadowed face, eyes steady through the curtain of rain. Not the detached glance of a passerby. Something sharper, more deliberate. And right then, lying in that bed, Lena knew one thing for certain. She was going to find him. The first night in the hospital passed in a haze of half-sleep and beeping monitors. Lena kept drifting in and out, waking to the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway, the quiet murmur of voices from other rooms, the occasional distant wail of an ambulance arriving at the E. Every time she opened her eyes, she half expected to see him there in the chair by her bed. But the chair stayed empty. By morning, the rain had slowed to a fine mist, but the gray outside the window made it hard to tell where the clouds ended and the city began. The doctor came in, asked her the usual questions: headache, dizziness, and told her she'd been lucky. Lucky the airbags deployed. Lucky someone had been there to pull her out. Lucky the ambulance hadn't been the only help she got. Lena didn't feel lucky. She felt restless. When the nurse stepped out to get her breakfast, she reached for her phone on the bedside table. The cracked screen was smeared with rainwater and dried mud from the crash, but it still lit up. She opened her messages, first 3 from her boss. One from Mrs. Price asking for an update on her mother, and nothing from an unknown number. She tried the recent calls list. Nothing there either. Whoever had brought her in hadn't used her phone. That was strange. If he'd wanted to stay completely invisible, he could have left her there for someone else to find. But he didn't. He carried her all the way to the AO doors, spoke to the staff, then disappeared. She pushed herself upright, wincing at the sharp pull in her ribs. She needed to know why. The nurse returned with a tray and a warning. Eat first. Think later. Lena smiled faintly but didn't argue. She ate slowly, her mind elsewhere, building a plan she wasn't yet ready to admit to herself. She was discharged that afternoon with a bottle of painkillers and a warning not to overdo. The air outside was damp and cool, smelling faintly of wet asphalt and exhaust. Mrs. Price had offered to pick her up, but Lena told her she'd be fine catching the cab. It wasn't that she didn't want the company, it was that she didn't want to explain where she was going next. The driver looked at her in the rearview as she gave the address. "That's not back toward the interstate," he said. "I know," Lena replied. "Just take it, please." It wasn't far from the crash site, just a mile or so up the road, where the highway curved past a gas station and a row of tired-looking storefronts. If her rescuer had been on foot or on a bike, maybe he'd passed this way. The gas station attendant was leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone when she walked in. He glanced up with a nod. "Help you?" "I was in an accident 2 nights ago, just down the road," Lena said carefully. "Someone brought me to the hospital. I thought maybe they stopped here." The man scratched his jaw. "Hard to say. Storm like that, I don't remember much." "What did he look like?" "Tall, broad shoulders, eyes that could cut straight through you." She realized she didn't know how to describe him without making him sound like the lead in some too dark novel. "Dark jacket," she said instead. "Hood up. Looked like he'd been out in the rain for hours." The attendant thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Sorry, no one like that came in here." Lena thanked him and stepped back out into the parking lot. The mist clung to her hair, the chill settling into her bones. She wasn't ready to give up yet. She crossed the street to a diner whose windows were fogged from the warmth inside. The smell of bacon and coffee hit her the second she opened the door. A waitress in her 50s gave her a practiced smile. "Just coffee," Lena said, sliding into a booth. When the waitress returned with the mug, Lena tried again. "I'm looking for someone." "Tall guy, dark jacket, came through here maybe 2 nights ago, right after the storm broke." The woman frowned, then her eyes lit slightly with recognition. "Yeah, I think I saw him. Didn't sit down though. Just stood near the door for a minute, like he wasn't sure if he wanted to come in. Then he left." "Which way?" "Back toward the service road." Lena's grip tightened around the warm mug. Service roads didn't lead anywhere most people wanted to go. Abandoned warehouses, storage yards, dead ends. But maybe that's exactly why he'd gone that way. The waitress's words kept echoing in Lena's head as she left the diner. Back toward the service road. She pulled her coat tighter against the chill and crossed the narrow street, the mist sticking to her skin like cold breath. The turnoff to the service road was easy to miss, just a break in the guardrail and a weather-worn sign half swallowed by ivy. The pavement was cracked and uneven, the yellow lines so faded they were barely there. Overhanging branches formed a canopy that dimmed the light, muting the colors until the world felt drained of anything bright. Lena slowed her pace. Each step seemed to take her farther away from the noise of town and deeper into a place the rest of the world had stopped caring about. The air smelled of damp leaves and rusting metal, and somewhere in the distance, a loose piece of sheet metal clanged in the wind. She rounded a bend and saw a small wooden shack slouched against the tree line, its roof sagging under years. OF weather. Beside it, leaning on a kickstand, was a motorcycle. The chrome was dulled, one mirror missing, but the tires looked new. Whoever owned it hadn't abandoned it. Her pulse picked up. She crossed the gravel toward the shack, her boots crunching in the quiet. "Hello?" she called, her voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No answer. The front door hung slightly ajar, held by a single rusted hinge. Lena hesitated, glancing back toward the road. There was no one, no passing cars. Just her, the shack, and the uneasy feeling that she'd already crossed some invisible line. She pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the space was bare except for a narrow cot against one wall, a pile of blankets, and a dented thermos lying on the floor. The smell of gasoline hung faintly in the air, mixing with the damp musk of wood. On the cot was a folded jacket, dark, heavy, and instantly familiar. Lena stepped closer, her fingers brushing the fabric. It was stiff in places, like it had dried in the rain. She set it back down carefully, her eyes drawn to a wooden crate, tucked just underneath the cot. It was half covered by a rag. She knelt, pushed the cloth aside. Inside were yellowed newspapers, edges curled and fragile. The top one was folded open to a front-page story from years ago. Local man wanted in connection with triple homicide. Her breath caught. The grainy photo showed a man younger than she remembered from the night of the crash, but the eyes were unmistakable. Ethan Cole. Behind her, the floor creaked. Lena's heart lurched. She turned, still crouched, and froze. He was standing in the doorway, taller than she remembered, shoulders filling the frame, his hair damp and pushed back. His gaze locked on hers, unreadable, but his posture was utterly still, like a man who'd already calculated every move he might need to make. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then his voice, low and even, "You shouldn't be here." The sound of rain dripping from the eaves outside filled the silence between them. Lena stayed crouched by the crate, one hand still resting on the newspaper, as if she needed to hold on to something solid. She forced herself to speak. "It's you." Ethan didn't answer, didn't step forward. His eyes, sharp and steady, flicked once to the jacket on the cot, and then back to her. "You saved me," she said, her voice thin but steady. "Why?" His jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she shot back, rising to her feet. "It matters when the man who pulled me out of a wreck is the same one the paper says killed 3 people. The corner of his mouth twitched, not in amusement but something darker. "You believe everything you read?" "I believe in what I saw," she said. "And I saw you risk your life for a stranger." He took a single step inside, the door creaking shut behind him. The small room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with the damp scent of rain on his clothes. "And that's all you saw," he said quietly. "That's all you need to see." Lena shook her head. "If you didn't do what they say, then why are you hiding?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because hiding is the only reason I'm still breathing." The words landed like a weight. There was no tremor in them, no plea, just fact. She held his stare, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You could explain, you could tell me the truth. Truth gets people killed in my world," he said. "And I don't want your name on that list." Something in his tone made her hesitate. It wasn't anger, it was warning. Ethan stepped closer, close enough for her to see the faint scar running along his jaw. "You need to forget this place. Forget me. Walk out that door, get in your car, and don't come back." "And if I don't?" she asked. He didn't blink. Then you'd better be ready for what follows." For a moment, they just stood there, the rain's rhythm filling the space where more words could have been. Then he moved past her, opened the door, and stood aside, not inviting her out, but making it clear there was no other path. Lena stepped into the gray light, the chill biting at her skin. She turned back once, but he was already pulling the door shut, his face disappearing into shadow. The latch clicked as she walked back toward the road. The image of his eyes through the rain burned in her mind, not just the eyes of a man on the run, but of someone carrying a truth too dangerous to name, and she knew, no matter what he'd said, she wasn't going to walk away. The next 2 days were a slow burn of restless thoughts. Lena tried to go back to something like normal, checking in with Mrs. Price about her mom's condition, answering a few concerned texts from her boss, but her mind kept circling back to the shack, the motorcycle, and the man who'd looked at her as if she were both a problem and a promise. She'd told herself she was done, that she'd leave it alone. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing in that doorway, rain sliding down his face, the door closing between them like the end of a chapter she didn't want to stop reading. On the third morning, she found herself walking downtown without quite deciding to. The streets were still damp from an overnight drizzle, reflecting the pale light of a cloudy sky. People moved past her in small knots, carrying coffee cups, balancing grocery bags, rushing toward buses. The familiar hum of the city should have been grounding. Instead, it felt like background noise to a different kind of current, pulling her forward. She stopped outside a small open-air market wedged between 2 brick buildings. The scent of roasted peanuts and fresh bread drifted toward her, mingling with the faint bite of diesel from a delivery truck idling nearby. She moved among the stalls, pretending to browse the crates of apples and jars of honey, telling herself she was here for no reason at all. Then she saw him. It was just a flicker. At first, a tall figure at the far end of the row, hood down this time, the worn strap of a leather bag slung over his shoulder. His head turned slightly as he looked at something on a vendor's table, and the angle was enough for recognition to slam into her like a sudden drop. Her heart stumbled. He didn't seem to notice her, but there was no mistaking the way he moved, deliberate, unhurried, as if he belonged in every space he entered, but never stayed in one for long. Lena's fingers tightened around the bag strap across her chest. She could walk away, pretend she hadn't seen him, but her feet moved before the thought was finished. She trailed him past the bread stall, weaving between a pair of shoppers deep in conversation. The noise of the market faded in her head, replaced by the steady rhythm of his steps. He glanced over his shoulder once, not enough to meet her eyes, but enough to make her wonder if he'd felt her there. They turned down a side street where the crowd thinned, the buildings taller and closer together. Halfway down the block, he stopped. No warning. Lena froze a few yards away. When he turned to face her, there was no surprise in his expression. "You're following me," he said. She swallowed, keeping her voice even. "You didn't leave me much of a choice. There's always a choice. I owe you my life twice now. I'm not walking away without knowing who you really are." His gaze flicked past her, toward the far end of the street. "You need to go," he said. "I'm not." That's when she saw them. 2 men, moving steadily in their direction. Their clothes were casual enough, but the way they carried themselves set off alarms in her gut. One reached into his jacket, slow and deliberate. Ethan's voice cut through her pulse. "Stay behind me." The 2 men closed in with the slow precision of people who weren't in a hurry because they already knew their target couldn't get away. Ethan didn't wait for them to get any closer. His hand came up, not to touch Lena, but to signal her to move now. He turned sharply, guiding her toward a narrow cut between 2 buildings. "What?" she started, but the look he gave her shut the question down before it could finish. Alley swallowed them in shadow, the market noise fading into a distant hum. Their footsteps echoed against the damp brick walls, and somewhere above, a window slammed shut. Behind them, a voice called out, sharp and certain, "Cole!" Lena's pulse kicked hard. Ethan didn't look back. "Faster," he said, his tone low but edged. They broke out into a back street lined with dumpsters and loading bays. Ethan scanned the space with quick, deliberate movements, then grabbed her wrist, not rough, but firm enough to make clear there was no room for argument, and steered her toward a half-open service door. The air inside was cooler, filled with the faint smell of cardboard and machine oil. They moved through a narrow corridor into a dim storage space. Ethan eased the door shut behind them, his head tilting slightly as he listened for footsteps. Nothing. Not yet. Lena's breath came fast, the rush of adrenaline making her voice sharper than she meant. "Who are they?" "People who want something." "From me," Ethan said, eyes still on the door. "And they'll use anything or anyone to get it." Her stomach knotted. "Including me." His gaze flicked to hers for the briefest moment. "Especially you." A faint metallic clang echoed from outside, the sound of something heavy hitting pavement. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "We're not staying here." He crossed to a metal ladder bolted to the wall, the kind maintenance crews used to access the roof. "Up," he ordered. Lena hesitated, looking toward the door. "Now, Lena." She climbed, the rungs cold under her palms, her pulse thundering in her ears. Ethan followed close behind, and when they reached the roof, the late afternoon light hit her face like a slap bright. Gray and wide open compared to the alley below. From this vantage point, she could see the two men in the street, scanning the area like hunters. One of them looked up, just as Ethan pulled her down behind a rooftop vent. "We're moving," he murmured, and they crossed the roofline, heading toward the next building. The rooftop felt endless, a stretch of cracked tar paper and rusted vents slick from the morning drizzle. Every step was a careful balance between speed and silence. Ethan moved like he'd done this 100 times, each footfall sure, each glance calculated. They reached the far edge, where the gap between this building and the next was maybe 6 feet across. It wasn't much, but the alley below was a long way down. Ethan stopped, scanning the street 2 stories below. No sign of the men, but the tension in his shoulders told Lena that didn't mean they were safe. He turned to her. "You're going first." Her stomach dropped. "First? Are you kidding me?" "Ladder on the other side. You land, you move. Don't wait for me." "What if I don't think? Just jump." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the pounding in her ears. Lena stepped up to the edge, every nerve in her body screaming against the idea. The wind funneled between the buildings, cool against her face. She could hear her own breath, shallow and uneven. Then she pushed off. Her boots hit the next rooftop hard enough to jolt up her spine, but she stayed on her feet. She turned just in time to see Ethan follow effortless, his landing silent despite the weight of the leather bag still slung over his shoulder. "Move," he said, already heading toward a rusted ladder bolted to the far wall. They climbed down into a narrow alley that smelled faintly of rain and garbage. Lena was still catching her breath when Ethan stopped abruptly, holding a hand out to keep her behind him. From the main street, the sound of footsteps, steady, deliberate, echoed toward them. Ethan's eyes darted around, landing on a half-open metal door recessed into the brick. He pushed it open with his shoulder, gesturing for her to go in. The space beyond was dim, lit only by a single flickering bulb. It looked like some kind of disused workshop, dusty shelves, a workbench scattered with old tools, the air tinged with machine oil. Ethan shut the door without a sound, then crossed to the far wall and peered through a sliver between the boards. Covering a window. Lena stood there, her breath still ragged, watching him. He wasn't just reacting, he was anticipating. Every move had a purpose, like he'd mapped the entire escape before they'd even left the market. "Do you always have this kind of plan?" she asked quietly. "Only when someone's trying." To kill me, he said, not looking back. The footsteps outside slowed, then faded, replaced by the distant rumble of a truck shifting gears somewhere down the block. Ethan stayed at the window a few moments longer, eyes fixed on the street as if willing it to give up its secrets. Only when the quiet felt solid did he step back. "You can breathe now," he said. Lena let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You do this a lot?" His gaze met hers for a fraction of a second, then slid away. "Enough to know we've bought ourselves maybe 20 minutes. No more." She glanced around the workshop. Dust coated the shelves in a thick film, and a layer of grime dulled the steel of the old workbench. It looked like no one had been here in years, yet the lock on the door had been intact until he pushed it open. "This place yours?" she asked. "Not exactly." He moved toward the workbench, resting one hand on it as if it were a familiar surface. "Just somewhere I can disappear when I need to." Lena hesitated, then stepped closer. "You said those guys would use anything or anyone to get to you. Why? What do they want?" For the first time since they'd met, Ethan's posture shifted, not the alert, coiled readiness she'd come to expect, but something heavier, like the weight of an answer he didn't want to give. "They think I know something," he said. "Finally, something worth killing for. What is it?" His eyes flicked to hers, sharp again. "The kind of thing that gets you killed just for knowing it exists. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right. Now." She studied him in the dim light, noting the faint scar along his jaw, the way his knuckles were rough and healed over from breaks long past. There was a man here who had fought maybe more than once, not just to survive, but to keep moving forward. "Why save me then?" she asked quietly. "Twice now." "You didn't have to." Something in his expression shifted barely, but she caught it. "Because I don't leave people behind." The words were simple, but they landed in her chest like something heavy and unshakable. Outside, a car door slammed, the sound sharp in the muffled air. Ethan's head turned instantly toward the noise, his body sliding back into readiness. "Up," he said, already moving toward the back of the workshop. "We're leaving." Ethan moved with purpose toward the far corner of the workshop, where a row of dusty metal shelves leaned precariously against the wall. He gripped the side of one and pulled hard. The unit groaned, then swung outward like a door, revealing a narrow passage choked with shadows. Lena stared. "You planned this?" He gave her a look over his shoulder. "I planned for everything." The passage was barely wide enough for one person. The concrete floor sloped downward, the air colder, tinged with the musty dampness of a place that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Ethan took the lead, his steps quick but silent, glancing back once to make sure she was following. "Where does this go?" she whispered. "A block over, basement of a closed pawn shop. From there, we have options." Her hand brushed against the rough wall as they moved, the grit catching at her fingertips. Every sound seemed louder here, the shuffle of their boots, the faint drip of water somewhere ahead, her own breathing. After what felt like a long descent, Ethan stopped at a rusted steel door. He crouched, working the lock with a small set of picks he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. The soft click of tumblers falling into place was almost lost under the thudding in her chest. They slipped into the basement of the pawn shop. The place smelled of old wood and metal, the shelves still stacked with boxes left behind in the rush to close. Dim light filtered through a half-covered window high on the wall. Ethan crossed to the far side, checked the alley through the window slit, and nodded. "Clear, for now." Lena leaned against one of the wooden support beams, her pulse finally starting to slow. "Do you ever stop moving?" He shrugged. "Stopping is when they catch you. You talk like this is all you've known for years." "Because it is." The words came without hesitation, but there was no pride in them, only a flat acceptance, like someone reciting the rules of a game they never asked to play. Lena hesitated before speaking again. "And now I'm part of it." "Ethan." met her eyes for a long moment, then said, "Yeah, now you are." The simplicity of the answer hit harder than she expected. There was no sugarcoating, no false promise that she could walk away unscathed. Outside, a siren wailed briefly, then faded into the distance. Ethan moved toward the stairs leading up to the main floor. "We've got a window to move before they pick up the trail again. You ready?" Lena swallowed hard, but her answer came without thinking. Yes. The stairs from the pawn shop groaned under their weight, each step a small protest against years of disuse. Ethan kept his hand lightly on the rail, his other hovering near the inside of his jacket. Lena didn't have to see the weapon to know it was there. He moved like someone who was always a second away from needing it. The door at the top opened into a side street that felt tucked away from the rest of the city. The pavement was uneven, the buildings old enough that their brickwork showed through patches of faded paint. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, its light flickering weakly in the gray afternoon. Ethan stepped out first, scanning both ends of the block before signaling her forward. They moved quickly but without running, weaving between buildings, cutting through narrow passages that seemed more like cracks in the city than streets. Lena kept pace, though her mind was running faster than her legs. "You've done this before," she said quietly. "What? Losing people? Moving through places like this, staying invisible?" His eyes flicked toward her briefly, then forward again. "Long enough that it's instinct." "And the men chasing you? They're not cops." "No." The single word carried enough certainty to kill any doubt. "Then who?" She pressed. He stopped at the mouth of another alley, waiting for a delivery truck to rumble past before answering. "The kind of people who don't need a badge to take you off the street. The kind who own the street." Her stomach tightened. "And what do they want from you?" "Information." His voice was flat, but there was a tension under it, like a taut wire ready to snap. "Something I saw years ago. Something I shouldn't have." "And you've been running ever since?" "Not running," he said, starting forward again, staying ahead. The distinction mattered to him. She could hear it in the way he said it. They turned down another street, this one lined with shuttered storefronts and graffiti-tagged walls. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed again. Lena glanced at him. "You could tell me what it is. Let me decide if it's worth this." His jaw tightened. "It's not worth dying for." "You think I'm afraid of dying?" He gave her a look, sharp and assessing. "No, I think you don't understand what it's like to know exactly when and how someone means to kill you." The quiet that followed was heavier than the footsteps echoing off the walls. They reached the end of the block, where a nondescript brick building stood with no sign, just a recessed doorway. Ethan stopped, his hand already on the doorknob. "This is where we disappear for the night," he said. "Tomorrow, we move again." Lena didn't ask where again would be. For now, she just followed him inside. The door shut behind them, with a heavy click, shutting out the weak daylight and the noise of the street. Inside, the air was cooler, faintly scented with old wood and something metallic-like rain hitting iron. The entryway opened into a narrow hall that led to a small living space, sparsely furnished. A worn leather couch, a low table, a single lamp casting a muted circle of light. Ethan locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and pulled the curtains shut. Then he shrugged off his jacket and set it across the back of a chair, the weight of it making the wood creak. "This place safe?" Lena asked. "Safe enough for tonight," he said, crossing to the small kitchenette. He filled a kettle from the tap, set it on the stove, and turned the burner with a quiet click. "You hungry?" She realized she hadn't eaten since before the market, but the adrenaline still humming through her veins dulled any real hunger. "Not really." Ethan nodded once, as if he'd expected that. He pulled 2 mugs from a cabinet and set them on the counter. The simple domesticity of the act felt strange here, like a quiet moment that didn't belong in the same world as rooftop jumps and shadowed alleys. Lena sat on the couch, her eyes scanning the room. It was clean, but impersonal. No photos. No books, nothing to suggest anyone lived here long-term. "This isn't your place either, is it?" she said. Ethan poured steaming water into the mugs, dropped in tea bags, and carried one over to her. "I don't have a place." She took the cup, the warmth seeping into her hands. "Everyone has somewhere they go back to, not me." The way he said it left no room for argument. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the faint hiss of the kettle cooling and the ticking of pipes behind the walls. For the first time since she'd found him at the market, Lena felt her heartbeat begin to slow. And then a floorboard creaked. It came from the hallway they'd just walked down. The one leading to the front door. Slow, deliberate, Ethan's. Mug was already on the table before the sound faded. His hand slid inside his jacket. He'd kept the weapon close after all, and he moved toward the hallway without a word. Lena set her tea down and rose, following a step behind despite every instinct telling her to stay put. Another creak. This one closer. Ethan reached the corner and paused, listening. The silence on the other side was thick, like the air before a storm. He glanced back at her, his expression sharp, and mouthed one word, "Stay." Then he stepped into the hall. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and narrow, the only light spilling in from the living room behind them. Ethan moved like a shadow, silent, balanced, every step measured. Lena stood just far enough back to see him reach the front door, his free hand testing the deadbolt. It was still locked. The sound had come from inside. Ethan's head tilted, catching something Lena couldn't yet hear. A shift in the air. A faint scrape, like fabric brushing against wood. His gun came up, angled low but ready. "Whoever you are," he said, his voice calm but edged. "You've got 5 seconds to make yourself visible." No answer, then movement. A figure stepped out from the narrow coat closet to the left of the door. Lena's breath caught. The man was tall, gaunt, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the shadows. His face was partly hidden by the brim of a cap, but his eyes cold and assessing locked instantly on Ethan. "I'm not here for her," the stranger said, his voice low and even. "Only you." Ethan didn't lower his weapon. "Then you've already made a mistake." The man's gaze flicked to Lena for half a beat, then back. "You've got more enemies than you think, Cole. The ones you're running from? They're amateurs compared to what's coming. Why don't you enlighten me?" Ethan said, his stance tightening. The stranger gave the barest hint of a smile. "Not my job. I was sent to watch. Make sure you're still breathing." For now, Lena felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. This wasn't just about a past crime or some dangerous piece of information. There was another layer, another player watching from the shadows. Before she could speak, the man stepped back toward the closet, never taking his eyes off Ethan. "They'll find you soon. And when they do, you won't have the luxury of choosing who to trust." And then he was gone, slipping through a narrow rear exit in the closet Lena hadn't even noticed was there. Ethan waited, listening to the faint retreat of footsteps. Before lowering his gun, Lena's voice broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" His jaw tightened. "A reminder of what?" "That we're not running from one enemy," he said, looking straight at her. "We're running from a war." Ethan stood in the center of the hallway for a long beat, the silence stretching until Lena could hear her own pulse. His gaze wasn't on her, it was fixed on the closed closet door, as if he could still see through it, tracking the stranger's fading presence. Then he holstered his gun and turned sharply toward the living room. "Get your bag," he said. "What?" "It's the middle of the night. We're leaving, now." Lena didn't move. "You said this place was safe." "It was," he replied, his voice clipped, "until he walked through that door. Which means someone else knows we're here. Which means it's burned." She grabbed her bag from the couch, shoving the strap over her shoulder. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they won't expect us to be." The answer was vague, but there was no hesitation in it. He checked the window curtains, then reached under the couch and pulled out a small black duffel she hadn't noticed before. The way he slung it over his shoulder made it obvious it was packed for exactly this scenario. They left through the back, stepping into a narrow service alley slick with rain. The cold air slapped against her cheeks, waking every nerve in her body. Ethan moved quickly, cutting between dumpsters and loading docks until they reached a side street where a motorcycle was parked under a tarp. Lena frowned. "This yours?" "Borrowed," he said, pulling off the cover. The bike was matte black, stripped down, the kind of machine built more for vanishing than for show. He handed her a helmet. "Put it on." She stared at it for a moment. "I've never put it on," he repeated, softer this time, but with the same urgency. The engine roared to life under his hands, the sound bouncing off the wet pavement. Lena climbed on behind him, gripping the sides awkwardly until he reached back, took her wrists, and placed her hands firmly around his waist. "Hold on, tight." They pulled out onto the street, the city blurring into streaks of light and shadow. The cold wind stung her eyes, but beneath the rush of air and the vibration of the bike, she could feel the steady, unyielding presence of the man in front of her. Like no matter how fast they were moving, he already knew the next 3 turns. Somewhere deep inside, Lena realized this was the first time she'd stopped asking herself whether she should trust him. Now, she just had to survive long enough to find out why. They didn't stop until the city lights were a faint orange glow on the horizon. The road had narrowed into a cracked 2-lane strip bordered by dark trees, their branches clawing at the night sky. The air out here smelled different, cleaner, sharper, but it did nothing to calm the thrum in Lena's veins. Ethan finally slowed, pulling the bike onto a gravel turnout beside a weathered cabin half hidden by pine. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet rang in her ears. "This place looks abandoned," she said, pulling off her helmet. "It is," he replied, swinging his leg over the bike. "No neighbors, no traffic, that's the point." Inside, the cabin was small, 1 room, a wood stove, a rickety table, and a bed shoved into the corner. Dust drifted in the beam of his flashlight. There was no electricity, no plumbing she could see, but the roof was intact and the door had a sturdy lock. Ethan dropped his duffel by the bed and went straight to the stove, checking the firebox. "We'll stay here a few hours. Long enough to rest, then we move again." Lena sank into one of the chairs at the table, her body still buzzing from the ride. "You can't keep doing this forever," she said. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he struck a match, the flare of light briefly illuminating his face-sharp planes, tired eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I told you. Before they think I know something. I do. And it's the kind of truth that gets people killed if the wrong hands touch it." She leaned forward. "What is it?" He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could handle the answer, or whether telling her would make her a bigger target than she already was. "It's about someone," he said finally. "Someone I couldn't save." The match burned down to his fingers, and he shook it out. The small, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand told her this wasn't just a story. This was the wound he'd been carrying all along. Before she could press him, he stood, busying himself with stacking kindling in the stove. "Get some rest, Lena," he said without looking at her. "Tomorrow you'll understand why I couldn't walk away from you that night." The words lodged in her chest, heavy and electric all at once. She didn't know if she was more afraid of the danger chasing them, or the truth waiting to catch up. Outside, the wind shifted through the pines, carrying the kind of stillness that always comes just before a storm. The first thing Lena noticed was the cold dot it crept in through the gaps in the cabin walls, curling around her in thin threads of air that smelled faintly of pine and damp earth. She opened her eyes to a pale gray light filtering through the single window, the kind of light that meant the sun was still hiding just below the horizon. The wood stove was cold. So was the bed in the corner where Ethan had been. She sat up quickly, her pulse kicking before her brain caught up. The cabin door was still shut, the lock still drawn from the inside, but Ethan's jacket was gone from where he'd draped it over the chair. A dozen possibilities hit her at once. He'd gone to Scout, to get supplies, to walk away without her. That last thought landed sharper than she wanted to admit. The crunch of boots on gravel broke. The silence. She moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see. Ethan was there, coming up the narrow path with a plastic grocery bag in one hand and a small axe in the other. The sight was almost disarming, like something from a different life, one where the most dangerous thing in the world was whether the coffee had gone cold. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, his breath curling in the cold air. "You're up. I thought you left," she said before she could stop herself. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or a faint hurt, but it passed quickly. "If I was going to leave you, I wouldn't have brought breakfast." He set the bag on the table and the axe beside the door. Inside the bag was a loaf of bread, 2 cans of soup, and a pack of instant coffee. Nothing special, but Lena couldn't remember the last time she'd been more grateful for groceries. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against tin mugs, and the occasional pop from the fire Ethan had coaxed back to life. She studied him over the rim of her cup, how he moved, the way he scanned the room even here, in what he'd called a safe place. When they'd finished, he leaned back in his chair. "We'll need to head out by noon. If they've got anyone in this area, daylight's the worst time to be on the road, but staying here longer is worse." She nodded, though the thought of leaving the fragile safety of the cabin twisted something in her chest. Then Ethan's gaze met hers, steady, unblinking. "There's something you need to know before we go." Ethan didn't speak right away. His hands rested on the table, fingers loosely interlaced, but Lena noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing over each word before deciding whether to let it out. "What I'm about to tell you," he said finally, "isn't the whole story. But it's enough for you to understand why I can't just stop moving." Lena sat still, watching him carefully. "5 years ago," he began, "I was in a place I shouldn't have been, seeing things I wasn't supposed to see. It was a shipment, people, not goods. They were being moved through an old warehouse outside the city. I wasn't there by accident." Her stomach turned. "You were undercover?" His lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not officially, but I was trying to get someone out. A girl." He leaned back, his gaze drifting somewhere beyond the cabin walls. "I'd been told she was 17. Her name was Mia. By the time I found her, she'd stopped talking. Wouldn't even look at me. I got her halfway out before." His voice caught, not enough to sound weak, but enough for Lena to feel the weight of the memory. "They found us." "She didn't make it." Lena swallowed hard. "And they blamed you." "They didn't need to blame me," Ethan said quietly. "I blamed myself, still do." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. Lena wanted to say something to close the space between them, but before she could, Ethan's head snapped toward the window. "What is it?" she whispered. He stood slowly, crossing to the curtain. Without pulling it back, he shifted it just enough to see outside. His voice, when it came, was low and certain. "They found us." Enfin moved away from the window, already reaching for the duffel by the bed. His voice was calm, but his movements were fast, deliberate. "Pack your things, quietly." Lena's pulse spiked. "How many?" 2 vehicles, 4, maybe 5 men. He was already unzipping the duffel, checking the pistol inside, and sliding a spare magazine into his jacket pocket. "If they're smart," one circling around back. The reality of it hit her then. They weren't just going to knock and ask questions. Whoever was outside was here to take him, and anyone with him, off the board. "Is there another way out?" She asked. "There's always another way," he said, crossing to the far corner of the cabin. He dropped to one knee and pulled up a section of warped floorboards, revealing a narrow crawl space lined with cold dirt. "You're kidding," she whispered. "Not if you want to see tomorrow." The sound of tires grinding on gravel grew louder, closer. Shadows passed across the thin curtain. Ethan looked at her, his expression firm, but not unkind. "Feet first. Keep moving until you hit the tree line. Don't stop. I'll be right behind." "You," Lena hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as a sharp knock rattled the frame. Then another. "Ethan Cole." A voice called, deep and commanding. "You know why we're here. Make it easy on yourself." Ethan didn't respond. His gaze stayed locked on Lena until she dropped to her knees and slid into the crawl space. The cold earth scraped against her palms as she began to move forward, her breath loud in her ears. She was halfway to the other end when she heard the cabin door crash open. The sound of boots on wood, then a man's voice, low and dangerous. "Search everywhere. He's here." A moment later, Ethan's weight landed in the space behind her. "Go," he whispered, his voice steady even as the chaos erupted above. The crawl space opened into a slope that led down toward the trees. They scrambled out into the freezing air, the forest swallowing them in shadows. Somewhere behind them, a voice shouted, "They're in the woods." Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her into a run. Branches whipped at Lena's face as they tore through the undergrowth, the forest floor slick with damp leaves that threatened to send her sprawling. Ethan's grip on her hand was firm, guiding her around roots and over fallen logs without breaking stride. Behind them, flashlights cut through the darkness, thin, jagged beams that danced between the trees. Voices called out, too far to make out the words, but close enough to hear the anger in them. "Keep low," Ethan murmured, barely turning his head. His voice was steady, but she could hear the calculation in it. He was listening, measuring distance, reading the forest as if it were a map only he could see. They ducked behind a thick cluster of pines, crouching low. Ethan peered through the needles, watching the lights move. One beam swept dangerously close, grazing Lena's peripheral vision. She held her breath until it passed. "They're spreading out," he said quietly. "Trying to flank us. So what do we do?" He glanced at her, and in the dim moonlight his eyes were sharp and focused. "We stop running." Her heart lurched. "What?" "We can't outrun them forever, but we can make them lose interest." Before she could ask how, he was already pulling a small flare from his jacket pocket. He struck it against a rock, the sudden burst of red light staining the trees around them. Then he hurled it far to their left, where it landed with a hiss in a patch of wet leaves. Almost instantly, the flashlights shifted direction, drawn toward the glow. "That buys us maybe 3 minutes," Ethan said. "We use it." They moved again, this time angling toward the sound of running water. Lena's lungs burned, but the thought of stopping was worse. The trees thinned just enough to reveal a narrow stream cutting through the forest. Ethan waded in without hesitation, the icy water rushing over his boots. "Come on," he urged, holding out his hand. "The current will mask our trail." She took it, the cold biting at her calves as they pushed through the stream, following its winding path deeper into the woods. The voices behind them grew fainter, swallowed by the sound of water and wind in the branches. After what felt like forever, Ethan slowed, finally stepping onto the bank. He scanned their surroundings, every sense alert, before nodding. "We're clear, for now." Lena sank onto a fallen log, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "That was too close," he finished for her. He knelt in front of her, his hand brushing hers for just a second, grounding her. "You did good." It was a simple thing to say, but it landed heavier than she expected, because for the first time since this started, she believed it. They followed the stream until the moon rose high, silvering the water and painting their breath in pale clouds. The forest was quieter here, the pursuit sounds long gone, but Ethan's pace didn't slow until they reached a ridge where the land dipped into a shallow hollow. Nestled against the slope was the skeleton of an old hunting shelter, half-collapsed roof, walls patched with weathered boards, but still enough to break the wind. Ethan ran a quick perimeter check, then gestured for Lena to follow him inside. It smelled of cedar and damp leaves. He set his duffel down, pulled out a small camping lantern, and flicked it on. Soft yellow light pooled across the rough floor, revealing a couple of battered crates and a stack of firewood gone gray with age. "Sit," he said. "Rest your legs." Lena lowered herself onto one of the crates, the ache in her thighs catching up now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She watched him work, laying out a thermal blanket, unzipping his coat to dig out a small tin of matches and a dented thermos. The fire, when it came, was tiny but warm. They sat close to it, the lantern between them casting shadows that danced across Ethan's face. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable exactly, it was heavy, like the air before a confession. Finally, Lena broke it. "You said earlier that you couldn't walk away from me that night. Why?" His eyes stayed on the fire. "Because I've seen you before." The words landed like a drop of ice down her spine. "What do you mean?" He lifted his gaze then, and in the flickering light, she saw something raw there, something almost unguarded. "Not here, not like this, years ago. You were with a woman, your mother, I think. She was trying to get you onto a bus at the terminal in Brookdale. Her breath caught. I was 17. My mom was sending me to live with my aunt after." She stopped herself. "After it got bad," he finished quietly. She swallowed. "You were there?" "I was passing through, but I remember the way she looked at you. Like she was sending you away to save you, even if it broke." Her. The fire popped softly between them. "Why didn't you say anything before?" she asked. "Because I didn't know if you'd remember, or if it would even matter." "It matters," she said, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if the chill running through her was from the cold or from the way his voice had shifted, gentle, but laced with something she couldn't yet name. The fire had burned down to a low, steady glow, its warmth just enough to keep the cold from settling too deep into Lena's bones. She found herself watching the slow rise and fall of Ethan's shoulders as he sat across from her, both of them wrapped in the quiet of the forest night. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called 3 long notes, then silence. But then it came. Again, 3 long notes, perfectly spaced, identical in tone. Ethan's head lifted slightly. "That's not an owl," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena frowned. "What do you mean?" "It's a signal," he cut in, already reaching for the duffel. "They're marking positions, which means they're closer than we thought." Her pulse quickened, the comfort of the fire now feeling like a spotlight in the dark. "How close?" Ethan's eyes scanned the shadows beyond the lantern glow. "Close enough to hear us if we talk any louder." He doused the lantern in one swift motion, plunging the shelter into darkness. The only light left was the faint ember of the fire, quickly fading as he kicked dirt over it. Lena's breathing sounded too loud in her own ears. Ethan's hand found her wrist. Steady but firm. "We move now. Stay low. Follow my lead." They slipped out of the shelter, the cold hitting harder without the fire. The forest was alive with quiet, too quiet, Lena realized, as if everything in it was holding its breath. A faint crunch of leaves came from somewhere to their right. Then another behind them. "They're bracketing us," Ethan murmured. "Trying to hurt us somewhere." "To where?" she whispered. "That's what we're not going to find out." And with that, he pulled her into the thickest part of the trees, the darkness closing in around them like a second skin. The ground sloped downward, forcing them into a narrow gully choked with wet leaves and tangled roots. The air here felt heavier, as if even the forest was warning them to turn back. Ethan moved ahead, scanning each shadow, every shift of branch in the faint moonlight. Then he froze. One arm shot out across Lena's chest, stopping her mid-step. "Don't move," he breathed. She followed his gaze and saw it, almost invisible in the dark. A thin wire stretched ankle-high across the gully. Her heart lurched. "What is that?" she whispered. "Tripline," he said. "Could be a flare, could be an alarm. Either way, it tells them exactly where we are." He crouched, studying the wire. His eyes flicked to the slope on either side. Then to the gully ahead. "There'll be more. Probably in a pattern." As if to confirm it, Lena spotted another glint of metal further ahead, just above the ground. The realization hit hard. They weren't just surrounded. They were being funneled. "They're herding us towards something," she murmured. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, which means our only play is to go where they don't want us. But back would put us in their hands." Sideways, maybe up the ridge. She looked at the ridge. It was steep, littered with loose rock and slick leaves. The kind of climb that would be loud and slow. "They'll hear us. They'll hear something no matter what we do," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Better it's us moving away than us getting cornered." The sound of a twig snapping behind them made the decision for her. Ethan grabbed her hand and started up the ridge, each step a careful negotiation with gravity and silence. Halfway up, Lena dared a glance back. A shadow moved through the gully where they'd been seconds ago, pausing just long enough for a thin beam of flashlight to sweep over the tripwire. The figure didn't touch it. They already knew where the prey had gone. Ethan hauled her the last few feet to the ridge's crest. Both of them dropped low, hearts pounding. Somewhere below, the forest was coming alive again, but now it was with the sound of boots and voices. "Too many to count. They'll chase us," Lena whispered. "They will," Ethan said, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. "But they won't catch us, not tonight." They moved fast along the ridge, the ground uneven beneath their feet, the darkness ahead broken only by slivers of moonlight through the canopy. Behind them, the pursuit had changed, no longer cautious, but urgent. The voices were closer now, sharper, the rhythm of boots pounding the earth, keeping time with Lena's racing heart. Ethan slowed just enough to press something into her hand, a small flashlight, no bigger than her palm. "When you hear me yell, you run east," he whispered. "Follow the stars. Don't look back." Lena gripped it, confused. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I'm going to make sure they follow me, not you." The words landed like a punch. "No, that's insane. You can't." He cut her off with a look steady, unflinching. "You're the one they can use, your leverage. If they catch you, I'll give them anything to get you back. I can't let that happen." She shook her head, the cold biting at her throat. "Ethan, you don't even trust me," he said, softer now. "Please." Before she could argue again, he took off to the right, crashing through the undergrowth with deliberate noise. The forest erupted behind him, flashlights swinging, voices shouting. The chase shifted instantly toward the sound. Lena stood frozen. For a heartbeat, the flashlight burning cold in her hand. She could still hear him moving, drawing them away, but every step he took sounded like it might be his last. A single gunshot cracked through the trees. Then silence. Her breath caught, the air suddenly too thin. Somewhere far off, an owl called 3 long notes. The forest had gone utterly still, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Lena stood rooted to the ridge, the small flashlight clutched so tightly her fingers ached. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of that gunshot still rang in her bones. Ethan's last words, "Trust me, please," pulled in one direction. The hollow in her chest where fear had settled pulled in another. She forced herself to breathe, slow and quiet, straining to catch any sound that might tell her which way the night had tipped. But all she could hear was her own pulse and the faint hiss of leaves rubbing against each other. "Run east." Follow the stars. Don't look back. She tilted her head upward, the canopy above breaking just enough to reveal a sliver of sky. The stars glittered faintly, too far away to care about. What happened to a single woman on a cold ridge in the middle of nowhere? Her legs finally moved, one step, then another. She had to survive. That was what he wanted. That was what made sense, but then she saw it faint, low to the ground, no bigger than a match head. A flicker of red light deep in the trees to her right, pulsing once, twice like a heartbeat. She froze. It was the same kind of flare Ethan had thrown earlier, but dimmer, like it had been hidden. If it was his, it meant he was still alive. If it wasn't, it meant they were leading her into something she couldn't walk out of. Lena's hand shook around the flashlight. She could run east and maybe disappear into the night. Or she could follow the faint glow and maybe never come back. She turned toward the light. The ground fell away quickly, the ridge giving into a slope cluttered with wet ferns and loose rock. She moved carefully, crouched low, her ears tuned for any movement that didn't belong to her. The red light pulsed again. Closer now, she was almost on it when a voice cut through the dark low, strained but unmistakable. Lena. Her heart lurched. She stepped into a small clearing and saw him, Ethan, on one knee, a smear of blood down the side of his face. His pistol was in one hand, the flare in the other. Before she could speak, he shook his head sharply. They're circling back. We have maybe 2 minutes. Somewhere behind her, the forest crackled with movement. The hunt wasn't over. It had only changed shape. Ethan rose slowly, wincing as he put weight on his left leg. Lena moved toward him, but he waved her off. I'm fine, he muttered, though the shallow hitch in his breath said otherwise. We don't have time to play nurse. He snapped the flare in his hand, the dim red glow flaring brighter for a few seconds. Instead of tossing it away, he wedged it into the fork of a nearby branch at shoulder height. They'll see it, and think we stopped here, he said. Gives us a window to get ahead. The movement behind them was louder now, branches breaking, leaves crunching under boots. Windows closing, Lena whispered. Ethan's eyes darted upward, scanning the slope. There, see that deadfall? She followed his gaze to a massive pine trunk that had fallen across a ridge about 20 feet above them, its roots ripped from the earth. Behind it, the terrain dropped sharply, concealment if they could reach it without being spotted. He started for it, keeping low, his steps quiet despite the limp. Lena mirrored him, matching his pace, fighting the urge to glance back. They were halfway to the deadfall when a flashlight beam swept across the clearing they'd just left. Voices followed, quick, clipped orders. Ethan grabbed her wrist and yanked her the last few steps, pulling her behind the trunk just as a burst of automatic fire shredded the ferns where they'd been standing. Lena's breath came in ragged bursts. They're shooting now? They're done trying to take us alive, Ethan said grimly. Which means we just became a bigger problem than whoever sent them. From their hiding spot, they could see 3 men moving into the clearing, weapons up, scanning the tree line. One of them spotted the flare wedged in the branch and signaled to the others. Hooks in, Ethan murmured. Now we move. Without waiting, he dropped into the steep incline behind the deadfall, sliding more than stepping. Lena followed, the dirt and pine needles giving way under her boots, until the forest swallowed them again. The slope funneled them into a narrow ravine, the walls rising steep on either side, slick with moss. The air grew colder, heavier, until the sound reached them, a low, constant roar. Ethan slowed, raising a hand for Lena to do the same. Water, he said quietly. They rounded a bend and saw it. A rushing creek, swollen from recent rain, cutting a jagged path through the ravine floor. The current churned dark under the faint moonlight, carrying broken branches and froth. It's too fast, Lena said, instinctively stepping back from the edge. It's our best shot. He scanned the banks, eyes narrowing at the way the walls closed in downstream. There's an old logging tunnel a headwater cuts through under the ridge. If we make it inside, they can't track us until we're halfway out the other side. And if we don't make it inside? He met her gaze, then we're done. Before she could argue, he was already stepping into the water, his boots disappearing instantly beneath the surface. The cold punched at her legs when she followed, stealing the air from her lungs. The current caught them almost immediately, tugging hard, dragging them toward the narrowing walls. Ethan gripped her forearm, anchoring her against a sudden drop. "Stay close to me," he said through clenched teeth. The tunnel mouth appeared out of the dark, a jagged black gap, barely tall enough to duck under, the water foaming white where it squeezed through. They pushed forward, each step a fight against the current. Lena's foot slipped on a smooth rock and the water surged over her shoulders. Panic clawed up her throat until Ethan's arm locked around her waist. Hauling her upright, they plunged into the tunnel, the sound swelling until it was everywhere, water against stone, their own gasping breaths, the faint scrape of boots on submerged rock. Halfway in, Lena's hand brushed something slick. She looked down and saw it, a pale shape caught against the wall. Not a branch, not debris. It was a deer carcass, half submerged, its eyes clouded and empty. The smell hit her a second later, even through the cold. Ethan's voice was sharp over the roar. "Don't look. Keep moving." But she couldn't shake the image. The way the animal seemed almost wedged there, like it hadn't just drowned, but been placed. The water pressed harder as they went deeper into the tunnel, the walls closing in until Lena's shoulders brushed slick stone on both sides. The sound was deafening now, every splash, every breath magnified, swallowed, and thrown back at them. But the image of that deer wouldn't leave her mind. The way its legs were twisted unnaturally, the way its body blocked part of the flow, making the current pull harder toward the wall. Ethan must have seen her glance back, because his voice came low but urgent over the roar. "Don't think about it. I can't not," she shot back. "That thing didn't just wash in here. Someone put it there." He didn't answer right away, but his jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the narrow strip of darkness ahead. "That's what I'm worried about." The tunnel curved, and for a second, Lena thought she saw moonlight ahead. An opening, a way out. Relief started to rise in her chest, until Ethan's grip on her arm yanked her down into the water. "Under!" he barked. She didn't question. She went under, the cold slamming into her chest, the current shoving them forward. Above, a sharp thunk echoed off the stone, followed by another, and another metal striking rock. They surfaced a few feet ahead, gasping. Behind them, the water churned where something had dropped from above into the tunnel entrance. "Net," Ethan said between breaths. Waited. "If we'd been standing," she didn't let him finish. "So they knew we'd come this way." "They know this land better than we do," he said grimly. "Which means from here on out, we stop playing by their map." They pushed forward, the pale glow had growing stronger, until the tunnel spat them out into open air. The creek widened here, the banks rising into steep, rocky walls. Lena pulled herself onto the shore, her legs trembling from cold and exhaustion. Ethan climbed out beside her, scanning the ridges above, and that's when they saw it high on the cliff, just visible in the moonlight. A figure, standing perfectly still, watching them. The figure didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, backlit by the moon, as if carved out of the rock itself. Even at this distance, Lena could sense the weight of that stare, the way it pinned them in place. Ethan's posture shifted subtly, his hand resting near the holster at his side, though he didn't draw. "They're not shooting," he murmured. "Which means they want something. Or they're waiting for the others to catch up," Lena said. The figure tilted its head slightly, like it was measuring them. Then it lifted one arm slow, deliberate, and pointed down the ravine, in the direction the creek wound deeper into the forest. Lena's stomach tightened. They're telling us where to go? That's not good, Ethan muttered. If they're hurting us, there's a reason. And it's never a good one. The figure held the point for a long moment, then dropped the arm and stepped back, vanishing into the shadows of the cliff. Lena's instinct screamed to turn and climb in the opposite direction, to get as far from that signal as possible. But the sheer walls on either side of the creek made it clear up was almost impossible without gear, and back through the tunnel wasn't an option. Ethan's eyes flicked between the two routes. If we follow their lead, we walk right into whatever's waiting. If we don't, we risk getting trapped between them and whoever's ahead. She swallowed. So, what's the play? His jaw worked for a moment. Then he turned to her, voice low but certain. We give them what they expect, until the moment we don't. Before she could ask what that meant, he started down the creek, boots crunching over wet gravel. Reluctantly she followed, every step taking them deeper into whatever lay ahead and further from the illusion that they were the ones choosing the path. Somewhere high above, a stone clattered down the cliffside, bouncing off rock before splashing into the creek. Lena glanced up, but the ridge was empty again. Empty, but not unoccupied. The creek narrowed, twisting through a canyon of jagged stone. The moonlight barely reached the water now, and the air grew still, almost suffocating. Every sound, each splash of their boots, each breath echoed back at them in a way that made Lena feel watched from every angle. After 10 minutes, the walls began to fall away, opening into a broad, gravel-strewn basin. The creek spread thin here, breaking into shallow rivulets that wound between patches of mud and moss. Lena slowed, scanning the open space. Where are we? Ethan didn't answer right away. He was crouched near a dark patch in the mud, his hand brushing over it before he stood again. Tracks, a lot of them, some fresh. She followed his gaze and saw what he meant, boot prints, heavy and deep, leading in all directions. Mixed among them were others, lighter, smaller, and some that weren't boots at all, but bare feet. A shiver ran down her spine. Who the hell walks out here barefoot? No one by choice, Ethan said. His tone was flat, but his eyes were sharper now, scanning for more. They moved forward, and soon the basin revealed more shreds of fabric. Snagged on thorn bushes, a dented water canteen half buried in silt, a plastic wristband with faded lettering. Lena crouched and picked it up. The words were barely legible, but she could make out part of it. Ward D. Her stomach turned. This looks like a collection point, Ethan finished. They've done this before, and not just to us. At the far end of the basin, a rusted metal gate blocked a narrow passage between two cliffs. The hinges were warped, but it stood just high enough to make climbing difficult without help. Lena stared at it. You think that's where they're taking us? Ethan's jaw tightened. If it is, then they're not just chasing us, they're driving us. Like cattle. She glanced back at the tracks scattered across the basin, each one a silent reminder that others had come this way. And not all of them had left. Somewhere beyond the gate, a faint metallic clang echoed, as if something heavy had just been dropped. Ethan turned toward her. Once we go through there, there's no turning back, you understand? Lena nodded, though her pulse was hammering. Then let's make sure we're not the ones who end up staying. Ethan tested the gate first, pushing gently to see if it would give. It groaned under his weight but didn't budge. He crouched, ran his fingers along the edge, and found the bottom hinge rusted almost to dust. Help me lift, he whispered. Lena slid her hands under the cold metal, the dampness seeping instantly into her skin. Together they heaved upward. The hinge shrieked in protest before giving just enough for Ethan to wedge a rock underneath. He slipped through first, scanning both directions on the other side, then motioned for her to follow. The passage beyond was narrow and shadowed, the walls streaked with mineral stains. The ground sloped slightly upward until they emerged into An open plateau unfroze. Rows of chain-link fencing stretched across the clearing, forming rectangular pens like a crude maze. Some of the fencing sagged inward, as if something heavy had pressed against it for too long. Others stood straight, but bore dark stains along the lower edges. Inside a few of the pens were objects that didn't belong in any hunting ground. Rusted folding chair, a cracked porcelain sink, the frame of an old cot with its mattress rotted away. Lena's throat tightened. "This isn't for animals." "No," Ethan said, his voice low. "It's for people." They moved between the pens, careful to avoid the broken glass and twisted wire littering the ground. Lena's flashlight beam swept across a patch of dirt, revealing scratch marks long, shallow gouges that radiated outward from a single spot. She crouched, tracing one with her fingertips. "Someone tried to dig here. Or claw their way out," Ethan said grimly. A sudden creak echoed through the air, metallic and close. They both turned sharply toward the sound, and in the far corner of the plateau, a single floodlight blinked on. Its beam swung lazily, illuminating a section of fence with a wide, open gate. Beyond it, the darkness was too thick to see into. Lena's stomach knotted. "They want us to go in there." Ethan's eyes never left the gate. "Yeah, question is, do we?" From somewhere deep in the shadows beyond, a slow, deliberate clap echoed. Once, twice, 3 times. Ethan's hand brushed against Lena's armlight, but steady a silent signal to stay put. He motioned for her to kill the flashlight, and they melted into the darkness, leaving the floodlight ahead as the only harsh slice of white in the night. The clapping stopped. In its place came footsteps, slow, deliberate, each one ringing against the chain-link fences like they were walking on a stage meant only for them. A tall figure appeared in the open gate, framed by the light. Broad shoulders, long coat down to the knees. In his left hand, a steel rod. In his right, a small radio, the static from it hissing softly like a steady breath. Ethan's body shifted, instinctively placing himself half a step in front of Lena. Man's voice cut through the silence, low, even and far too sure of itself. "Ethan Cross, finally, you step into my yard." Lena's stomach tightened. He knew Ethan's name. And it wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Like this was less of a hunt and more of a meeting long overdue. Ethan didn't answer right away. His grip on her arm was a quiet warning, "Don't speak." But there was something in his eyes now, not just caution, but recognition. "This doesn't involve her," Ethan said, his voice controlled. Grounded. Double quotes, "Oh, but it does." The man replied, taking one slow step forward. The light caught just enough to reveal a scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. "You know that, Ethan. Everything about this started with her." Lena's breath caught. "What?" Ethan turned sharply toward her. "Don't listen to him." The man tilted his head, a faint, knowing smile hidden in the shadow. "You haven't told her? Then let me." A piercing whistle sliced through the air, shrill enough to sting. From all around them, figures emerged, slipping through fence openings, climbing over panels, weapons in hand. More floodlights snapped on in unison, bathing the place in a blinding, artificial daylight. Ethan yanked Lena back, his eyes darting over the encircling shapes. It was already too late. They were surrounded. The man with the steel rod closed the distance to just a few yards. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "This time, you're not walking away. Neither of you." Lena's fingers dug into Ethan's wrist, feeling the pounding of his pulse. She didn't know if it was fear or rage or both, but before she could speak, a deep explosion thundered from somewhere outside the perimeter, loud enough to shake the ground under their feet. In the sudden chaos, smoke curling through the light, shouts breaking the order. Ethan leaned down, his breath hot against her ear. "Run." The blast ripped through the air like a thunderclap, swallowing every other sound. Floodlights flickered, and for a split second, the entire yard froze. Predator and prey caught in the same Stunned breath. Then the smoke rolled in, thick, acrid. It poured through the open gate, curling into the floodlight beams until everything turned to shifting shadows. Shouts broke the stillness, overlapping. Confused orders shouted, but not followed. Boots pounding in every direction. Ethan's grip clamped around Lena's hand. Move, she didn't think. She let him pull her into the chaos, weaving between sudden shapes lunging out of the haze. Someone grabbed for her jacket. She felt the tug at her shoulder, but Ethan's other hand shot out, shoving the attacker sideways into a chain-link fence with a metallic crash. Stay low, he barked, ducking under a sagging panel of fencing. They slipped through, boots splashing in a shallow puddle on the other side. The smoke was a blessing and a curse. It hid them, but it hid everything else too. Twice Lena nearly stumbled into shadowy figures before Ethan yanked her away. The clang of metal, the slam of boots, the metallic cough of weapons being readied, all of it tangled in the dark, like a net she couldn't see. They reached the far edge of the yard, where the fencing gave way to a stack of rusted barrels and collapsed pallets. Beyond it, only blackness. Ethan climbed first, his boots silent on the wood. He offered a hand down to her. Come on. She took it, scrambling over, and landed hard on the other side. The ground here was softer, uneven mud mixed with something sharper that crunched underfoot. Gunfire cracked behind them, blind bursts into the smoke. A round punched through one of the pallets just above Lena's head. She ducked instinctively, her heart leaping into her throat. Ethan's voice was low but urgent. We've got about 30 seconds before they fan out and cut off every exit. We hit the tree line now, or we're done. She nodded, forcing her legs to move. They bolted for the shadowed edge of the plateau, where the ground dropped steep into tangled underbrush. No lights, no voices. Just darkness waiting to take them. Ethan didn't slow. He grabbed her hand tighter and pulled them both over the edge. The last thing Lena heard before the trees swallowed them was a single voice behind the chaos, calm and cutting through the noise. Don't let them make it past the creek. The slope was steeper than Lena expected. Her boots slid in the loose soil, and more than once she would have gone down hard if Ethan's grip hadn't steadied her. The forest here felt different, older, denser. The canopy above swallowed most of the moonlight, leaving only fractured silver on the ground. They moved fast, weaving between trees, ducking under low branches. Somewhere behind them, the voices were growing fainter, but they hadn't stopped. Whoever was chasing them knew these woods. Lena's chest burned, her lungs pulling in air that tasted of smoke and damp leaves. She wanted to ask where they were going, but she was too busy keeping her footing until Ethan suddenly slowed, raising a hand. Wait. His voice was low, but it carried that edge again, the one she'd heard when the man in the yard had spoken her name. They stopped beside a massive fallen oak, its trunk split and hollowed with age. Ethan scanned the dark in every direction, then crouched, pulling a small object from his jacket pocket. It was a folded map, creased and worn, the kind you'd only carry if you'd been here before. You've been out here, she said before she could stop herself. His eyes flicked to hers, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face. Yeah. He smoothed the paper open against the tree trunk. And so have they. He pointed to a mark drawn in red ink, an X not far from where they must be now. This is where they'll try to cut us off. It's the only clearing with enough space for vehicles. If we keep straight, we're walking right into it. Then we go another way, she said. Ethan hesitated just long enough for her to notice. There's another way, but it's not exactly safe. Lena almost laughed. Safe left us about 3 hours ago. That got the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it was gone as fast as it came. All right, follow me. And whatever. You see, keep moving. Don't stop. They skirted the path, pushing into thicker undergrowth. The ground became uneven, the smell of wet earth sharper. After another few minutes, Lena started to hear it, a faint trickle at first, then louder, until the sound of rushing water filled the air. She realized where they were headed an instant. Before they reached it, the creek the same one the voice in the yard had told them not to cross. The creek cut a jagged line through the forest, its banks steep and slick from recent rain. Moonlight caught on the water's surface, breaking into silver shards that danced in the current. It was moving faster than Lena expected, too fast for comfort. She stopped at the edge, peering downstream where the black water bent sharply and disappeared. "You sure about this?" "No," Ethan said. He was already scanning the bank for a place to cross. "But it's our best shot." The voices behind them were closer now, faint but unmistakable. Branches snapped in the dark. Ethan pointed to a narrow section where the current funneled between two moss-covered boulders. "There. If you slip, aim for the second rock. I'll be right behind you." Lena hesitated only a second before climbing down. The cold bit into her legs instantly, stealing her breath. She braced against the current, focusing on the boulder ahead, each step a battle against the pull. Halfway across, her foot slid on something smooth stone, or maybe submerged wood, and the current shoved her sideways. She gasped, flailing for balance, and felt a strong hand clamp around her arm. Ethan hauled her upright, his boots grinding against the creek bed. "Eyes on me, Lena, not the water." She nodded, forcing her gaze up. His face was inches from hers, the moonlight catching in his eyes, and for a moment, she saw it. Not just urgency, but something heavier. Once they reached the far bank, he didn't let go of her arm right away. "There's a reason they don't want you crossing this creek," he said, breath visible in the cold air. "Because it slows us down?" She guessed. He shook his head. "Because once you're on this side, you're out of their territory." She frowned. "Territory? What are they, some kind of gang?" "Worse." He glanced back toward the water, where distant flashlight beams now danced along the opposite bank. "These people, they don't work for themselves. They work for someone who's been looking for you for a long time." Lena froze. "For me, I didn't even know any of this existed until you pulled me out of that crash." "Exactly." His voice was low now, almost drowned by the water. "You don't know them, Lena, but they know you. And they think I'm the reason they can finally find you." They moved quickly along the far bank, the sound of the creek fading as the forest closed in again. The air here felt different, cooler, quieter, as if even the night creatures knew better than to make noise. Lena kept close behind Ethan, her mind spinning faster than her legs could carry her. "Someone's been looking for me?" The thought made her chest tighten. She wanted to demand answers, but the way he kept scanning the trees told her now wasn't the moment. When they finally slowed, it was at a low ridge where the ground leveled out into a patch of open forest floor. Ethan crouched, checking there. Backtrail, no lights, no voices. For now, they were clear. "All right," he said quietly, straightening. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they regroup." "That's 20 minutes for you to start explaining," Lena said, stepping in front of him. "Because unless you think I'm going to just keep running without knowing why, you wouldn't believe me yet." He cut in. "Try me." Ethan hesitated, eyes locked on hers. It was the first time she saw him actually wrestle with the words. Then he took a breath. "The man you saw in that yard, the one with the scar? His name's Calder. He's been after me for years. But this time, he's not chasing me for me." She folded her arms, pulse quickening. "Then for who?" "For you," Ethan said. His voice was steady, but there was something in it, a weight that made her feel the truth before she fully understood. And not because of anything you've done. Because of what you are." Lena blinked. "What I am." He nodded slowly, but before he could continue, a sound cracked through the night, a distant, hollow boom, followed by the faint whine of something mechanical winding up. Ethan's head snapped toward it. "We're out of time." He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the deeper woods. I'll explain when we're somewhere they can't reach. But until then, trust me, Lena, staying alive comes first." She didn't know if she could trust him. But with the sound of pursuit rising again in the distance, she didn't have the luxury of choice. The sound was getting closer, boots hitting the earth, branches snapping, the metallic rattle of something heavy being carried. It didn't matter that they'd crossed the creek. Whoever was behind them wasn't giving up. Ethan veered left, leading Lena off the faint animal trail and into thicker brush. She stumbled once, catching herself on a low branch. "Where are we even going?" she hissed. "Someplace they won't." "Follow," he said without looking back. After a few more minutes of steady climbing, the trees began to thin, revealing a slope scattered with jagged rocks. At the base of the hill, Lena saw the dark mouth of a tunnel, wide, black, and framed by a half-collapsed wooden support beam. The air changed as they approached, cooler, with the faint tang of rust. "A mine?" she asked. "Abandoned for decades," Ethan said, pulling a small flashlight from his jacket. "Too unstable for anyone sane to enter. Which is why it's perfect for us." Double quotes. Lena stopped just short of the entrance. "Perfect isn't exactly the word I'd use." Ethan glanced at her, the beam of his flashlight catching the tension in her face. "You want to survive, or you want comfortable?" She didn't answer, but she followed him inside. The tunnel swallowed the sound of the forest almost instantly. Their footsteps echoed, the air damp and stale. Old mining rails ran along the floor, rusted to a deep red-brown. After a few hundred feet, the tunnel forked. Ethan chose the left without hesitation. "We keep moving until we hit the back chambers. No one in their right mind goes that far in." Lena's voice bounced in the narrow space. "And you've been here before?" His silence told her more than words could. "You know, for someone who says he's trying to keep me safe, you're doing a hell of a job not telling me why," she said. He slowed, the beam of his flashlight steady on the path ahead. "Because the truth doesn't change the fact that Calder won't stop. It only makes it harder to run." She swallowed, her mind still stuck on his earlier words, "what you are." Before she could press him, a faint noise echoed from deeper inside the mine. Not the scuttle of an animal, but the metallic clink of boot on rail. Lena's eyes widened. "Tell me that's not." "Yeah," Ethan said grimly, snapping off the flashlight. "They're already here." The darkness inside the mine was different from night, thicker, heavier, like it had a weight of its own. Without the flashlight, Lena could barely see Ethan's outline ahead of her. The sound of boots on the rails behind them was clearer now, each step amplified by the narrow walls. Ethan moved fast, guiding her by the wrist through the twists of the tunnel. Every so often, he'd pause just long enough to listen, head tilted, breath held, before pushing forward again. They rounded a bend and the passage opened into a wide chamber, the ceiling high and lost in shadow. Abandoned equipment sat in rusting heaps, a tipped-over minecart, coils of cable stiff with age, a cracked wooden crate spilling nails across the floor. Ethan led her toward a gap in the far wall barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. "This way, they won't see it unless they know it's here." Lena ducked in after him, the rock cold against her shoulders. On the other side, the tunnel sloped sharply down. Her boots scraped stone as she followed him into the deeper dark. The air grew colder. Dampness clung to her skin. Somewhere behind them, the faint sound of voices echoed, Calder's low tone distinct even at this distance. Ethan stopped suddenly, turning toward her. In the near blackness, his voice felt closer, more intimate. "Lena, when you were a kid, do you remember ever being somewhere you weren't supposed to be?" She frowned, caught off guard. "What does that have to do with think?" he pressed. "Someplace you don't remember clearly, maybe just flashes. Faces you didn't recognize." The answer came before she wanted it to. Images she hadn't thought about in years flickered in her mind. A cold room with humming lights, a woman's voice telling her to hold still, the sharp scent of antiseptic. She'd always assumed it was a dream, one of those strange, lingering ones from childhood. Her voice was unsteady. I thought that wasn't real. Ethan's jaw tightened. It was, and Calder was there. Before she could ask what. That meant a beam of light cut across the tunnel behind them, sweeping over the rock. Voices shouted. Ethan grabbed her hand. Come on, you need to hear the rest, but not here. They ran, the tunnel walls rushing past, the sound of pursuit closing in. The tunnel narrowed until they had to move single file. Ethan in front, Lena close enough to feel the back of his coat brush her arms. The air smelled sharper here, less of damp rock and more of something metallic, almost electric. Ethan slowed, crouching to run his hand along the wall. There's a vent shaft ahead, he murmured. Old emergency exit. It should come out near the ridge, should? Lena echoed. It's been 20 years, he said. I'm not promising anything. The sound of pursuit was closer, now flashlights dancing on the rock behind them. The harsh ring of boots on the rails replaced by the dull thud of steps on dirt. They reached the shaft. A vertical opening just wide enough for one person to climb. Through, rusted iron rungs clung to the wall, some bent, others missing entirely. Cool night air whispered down from above. Ethan turned to her. You first. I'll be right behind you. She grabbed the lowest rung, testing it before trusting her weight to it. Metal groaned, but held. She climbed, forcing herself not to look down, focusing instead on the faint square of moonlight growing larger above. Halfway up, her palm brushed over something carved into the stone beside the rung, a series of letters, scratched deep into the wall. She paused, running her fingers over them. It was a name. Her name, not Lena, but her full birth name, one she hadn't used in years, cut into the rock in jagged strokes. Her breath caught. Ethan. This is mine. My name. He looked up at her, his face shadowed but his eyes sharp. I know. Keep climbing. Why is it here? Who? Lena, move. His tone left no room for argument. She reached the top and pulled herself out into the open air. The forest spread out in all directions, moonlight silvering the leaves. She stepped back to give Ethan room as he emerged behind her, breathing hard. Below, voices shouted into the shaft, too far to reach them, but close enough to remind her the chase wasn't over. She turned to Ethan, her pulse still pounding. Why? Is my name down there? He met her gaze, the answer balanced on the edge of his tongue. But instead of speaking, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph, creased, worn, edges frayed. He handed it to her. It was her. A younger version, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. And in the background, half hidden in shadow, was Calder. Lena stared at the photograph, the edges trembling between her fingers. Her younger self looked frozen in time, hair shorter, eyes wide, a half smile caught mid-breath. And behind her, blurred but undeniable, stood the man she'd only just met in that yard. Calder. Her voice came out tight. This doesn't make sense. I've never seen him before last night. Ethan's jaw flexed. You have. You just don't remember it. She shook her head. No, I remember someone like him. You were 9, he said quietly. And you weren't supposed to remember. That was the whole point. Her stomach knotted. The point of what? Ethan hesitated, scanning the tree line as if buying time. The shouts from the mine shaft below were fading, replaced by the distant hum of an engine. Calder wasn't just in the background of your life, Ethan said finally. For a while. He was the center of it. And whatever they did back then, it's the reason you're standing here now. She gripped the photo harder. You're telling me I was part of their world? You didn't choose it, Ethan said. None of this was your fault. But to them, you're unfinished business. A cold breeze slid through the trees, making the leaves whisper. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears. Then why are you helping me? Why not just walk away before they drag you down with me? Ethan's eyes locked on hers, steady and unflinching. Because once, someone saved me when they didn't have to. And you remind me of her. Before she could respond, a beam of light swept across the ridge. Voices called out. The hum of the engine roared louder, climbing the slope toward them. Ethan's hand closed over hers, firm and certain. We move now. If they catch us here, it's over. She didn't ask where. She just ran with him, the photograph still clutched in her hand, the unanswered questions burning hotter than the fear chasing them. They didn't stop running until the hum of the engine, and the shouting had dissolved into nothing but the rhythm of their own footsteps and the rasp of breath in cold air. The forest here was quieter, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, like the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan slowed first, scanning the slope ahead. We're close. Close to what? Lena asked, still clutching the creased photograph in her jacket pocket. You'll see. They climbed over a ridge, and the trees abruptly gave way to a clearing. Below them lay what looked like a town, or the skeleton of one. Streets lined with buildings whose windows gaped open, their glass long gone. Signs faded to ghosts of lettering. A rusted swing set sat half submerged in weeds. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. What is this place? Ethan's expression didn't change. It doesn't have a name anymore. And it's not on any map. They descended into the Kungu Main Street. The silence was thicker here, heavy enough that every step felt too loud. Lena glanced into the windows they passed. An old diner with overturned stools, a hardware store with dust-coated shelves. It was as if everyone had left in a single moment and never come back. Why bring me here? She asked. Because they won't follow us into this town, Ethan said. And because I need you to remember something. They stopped in front of a 2-story brick building, the facade cracked but still standing. Above the doorway, faded letters spelled out, Warren County Municipal Hall. Lena frowned. I've never been here. You have, Ethan said quietly. He pushed the door open, hinges groaning. You just don't remember. Inside, the air was stale, laced with the faint scent of paper and mildew. Filing cabinets stood half open, drawers hanging like broken teeth. In the center of the lobby was a long desk, and behind it, a bulletin board covered in curled, yellowed notices. Ethan led her to a hallway at the back. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, catching on peeling paint and a trail of water stains. Along the ceiling, they stopped at a door marked Records Room. He turned to her. What you're going to see in here, you can't unsee. Before she could answer, he pushed the door open. Stacks of file boxes filled the room, some toppled, others neatly lined against the walls. Ethan went straight to one in the far corner, pulling off the lid and rifling through until he found a folder. He handed it to her. The tab read her full name. Lena's fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were pages of typed reports, dates going back nearly 2 decades. The first page had a photograph clipped to it, the same one she carried now, of herself as a child. Only this time, the photo had writing scrawled across the bottom in black ink. Subject: Clearwater Project Phase 3. Her stomach flipped. What the hell is the Clearwater Project? Ethan's eyes were steady on hers. That's what they were doing to you, Lena. And Calder wasn't just watching, he was in charge of it. Lena flipped to the next page, her breath shallow. The paper was thin, the typewritten lines slightly faded, as if the truth itself had been sitting here too long in the dark. Subject: Tran. Lena M. Dob, November 14, 1996. Her name, her date of birth. And underneath, in bold, Clearwater Project, Phase 3 candidate. The report was clinical. Stripped of humanity, height, weight, blood type, baseline cognitive scores. But then came the part that made her skin prickle. Special observations. Subject: demonstrates abnormal retention of sensory information and heightened reflexive response. Controlled exposure to auditory stimuli resulted in recall accuracy of 97%. Further testing recommended. She shook her head, looking up at Ethan. What does any of this even mean? I was a kid. He didn't answer right away. It means they were testing you, looking for things most people don't have. Her fingers turned another page before she could decide if she wanted to. This one had a photograph she didn't recognize, a blurry image of a small sterile room. A child sat in the center, hooked up to wires. The angle made it impossible to see her face, but she didn't need to. The posture, the way the hands rested on the knees, it was hers. Her chest tightened. No, that can't be me. I don't remember any of this. They made sure you wouldn't, Ethan said. Memory suppression, conditioning, it's in there somewhere. You just can't get to it yet. She stared at the photograph again, the edges cutting into her skin. And then, without warning, something flickered in her mind, a short, sharp flash. A woman in a lab coat leaning close, whispering something. Her breath had smelled faintly of peppermint. Lena stepped back, shaking her head. I just saw God. I don't even know if it's real. It's real, Ethan said quietly. And it's just the beginning. Before she could speak, a noise from outside shattered the stillness, a single, deliberate knock on the front door of the building, not pounding. Just one knock. Ethan's head turned sharply toward the sound. They found us. The knock came. Again, one solid rap that seemed to echo through the hollowed-out town hall. Ethan motioned for her to stay back, then moved silently toward the front lobby. His steps were careful, calculated, but Lena could feel the tension radiating off him. She followed, keeping low, her eyes darting to the broken windows where moonlight streamed in through gaps in the boarded wood. Ethan reached the door and pressed his ear against it. Whoever was outside wasn't moving. Who is it? His voice was steady, but it had an edge of readiness to act. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, muffled but clear. Lena? If you're in there, it's me, Grace. The name hit her like a drop in her stomach. She hadn't heard it in years. Not since she was 12. She stepped out from behind the wall before she could stop herself. Grace? Ethan shot her a look, sharp, warning, but it was too late. She'd already crossed the room, her boots scuffing on the dusty floor. He cracked the door just enough to see. His body angled to block most of the opening. The woman outside looked older, her hair streaked with silver, but the eyes were the same, warm, quick, watchful. Grace Miller. The neighbor from her childhood. The one who'd suddenly moved away. Without saying goodbye, and standing behind Grace, half in shadow, was a man Lena didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket with no insignia. His gaze stayed fixed on the street, scanning the empty buildings like he expected something to leap out. Let her in, Grace said, meeting Ethan's eyes. We don't have long before they sweep this place. Ethan hesitated just a fraction, then opened the door enough for them to slip through. The man shut it behind them and slid a metal bar into place. They're 2 streets over, he said quietly. We've got maybe 10 minutes, if that. Grace turned back to Lena, her expression softening. You've grown so much. I wish we had more time, but there's something you need to know, something your mother wanted you to have. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope, the paper yellowed and brittle. On the front, in handwriting Lena knew instantly, was her mother's name. Lena's fingers hovered over the envelope, afraid to touch it. The paper looked as fragile as pressed petals, the corners worn from years of being hidden. Grace pressed it into her hands. She made me promise to keep this safe until the day you needed it. That day is now. Lena slid her thumb under the flap, careful not to tear it. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper. The moment she saw the handwriting, her throat tightened. It was her mother's. Every loop and slant instantly familiar. She unfolded it slowly. The scent of old paper rose faintly, carrying with it a ghost of lavender, the same perfume her mother used to wear. My Lena, if you are reading this, then I could not keep you safe in the way I wanted. There are things I could not tell you when you were little, not because I didn't trust you, but because the truth would have put you in more danger. You were part of something before you were even born. It was called the Clearwater Project. And it was not about helping people, no matter what they told me. They said you were special. They said you could remember things no child should be able to. They wanted to use you for it. I got you out once. But if they've found you now, it means they never stopped looking. If you see Calder, run. If you see Ethan, trust him. Lena's eyes froze on the last line. And if you ever reach the town with no name, go to the municipal hall, records room, top left cabinet. You'll find the rest there. Her hands trembled as she lowered the letter. She looked at Ethan, who was watching her closely, his jaw tight. She knew you, Lena said quietly. Ethan didn't look surprised. I told you, we've crossed paths before. Before she could press him further, the man who had come in with Grace stepped to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. They're here, he said, and they're not alone. From outside came the low rumble of multiple engines, growing louder. The streetlights, long dead, suddenly flickered to life, bathing the empty town in a sickly orange glow. The sudden flare of the streetlights was wrong. The wiring in this place should have been dead decades ago. Ethan's eyes narrowed. They're not just here, they've powered the grid. Grace's companion cursed under his breath and moved away from the window. That means they've got portable generators and probably flood lamps. They're going to light the whole place up. The low rumble of engines split into several directions, the sound bouncing off the empty buildings until it was impossible to tell where it was coming from. Ethan's voice was low but sharp. We split up. Smaller targets are harder to corner. Lena's gut clenched. Split up? That's insane. We don't even know, Lena, he cut in, meeting her eyes. If they catch you with me, you don't get taken alive. You disappear, you understand? She did, even if she hated it. Grace stepped forward. I'll take her. Ethan hesitated, scanning Grace's face, searching for something in it. Finally, he gave a short nod. Stay in the shadows, use the back alleys. The man in the dark. Jacket moved toward Ethan. I'll cover you. We'll draw them west. Engines roared closer. The first beam of a spotlight swept across the far end of the street, climbing the facades of buildings until it painted the second-story windows. In blinding white, Ethan turned to Lena. His voice softened, just enough for her to hear over the noise. Hold on to that letter. Don't let anyone take it. She swallowed hard. I'll find you again. You'd better. Then he was gone, melting into the darkness at the side of the building, the man in the jacket on his heels. Grace grabbed Lena's arm. This way. They darted out a side door and into a narrow alley that smelled of rust and rain. Their footsteps were quick but careful, weaving through debris and overturned trash bins. But as they reached the far end of the alley, a new light swept across them, closer, lower, from a handheld source. A voice called out, calm but commanding. Don't run, Lena. You've already been here before. The tone froze her blood. It wasn't Calder. It was another voice from somewhere deep in her mind, one she hadn't heard in years but recognized instantly. She turned toward the light, heart pounding. The beam lowered just enough for Lena to see the man holding it. Tall, thin, with shoulders slightly stooped as if he'd spent years leaning over desks or lab equipment. His hair was mostly gray now, but his eyes sharp, almost colorless. Hadn't changed at all. The breath caught in her throat. Dr. Hale. The name left her lips before she even thought about it. She didn't know how she knew it, but the moment it was spoken, memories rippled through her. Quick flashes of white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the click of his shoes on tiled floors. Grace's hand tightened around her arm. Lena, don't. Hale took a slow step forward, the flashlight steady in his grip. You do remember. Good. That will make things easier. Her voice was shaky. You were there. In the room. I was everywhere you were. Holly said, from the day you arrived until the day your mother stole you away. Grace moved a step in front of her, but Hale's gaze cut to her like a blade. You were told to stay out of this, Grace. You should have listened. You're not taking her, Grace said flatly. He smiled faintly, not the smile of someone amused, but of someone certain. You think you can keep her from me? From what she was made for? Lena's chest tightened. Made for? Hale's eyes flicked back to hers. You really think your mother just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? No, Lena. She agreed to this. You were part of the project before you were even born. The words hit her like a physical blow. You're lying. I don't need you to believe me now, he said calmly. Once you're back in the facility, you'll remember everything. And then you'll understand why you were never meant to run. From the street behind him came the sound of approaching boots, multiple pairs. Closing in fast. Holly extended a hand toward her, palm open. Come quietly, and no one gets hurt. Grace stepped between them, her stance rigid. Over my dead body. Hale's expression didn't change. If that's the way you want it. Holly didn't give a signal, but the moment his gaze flicked sideways, two figures emerged from the shadows behind him, both in black, both armed. Grace shoved Lena backward. Run, one of the men lunged. Grace swung first, catching him across the jaw with the heel of her hand. He stumbled but didn't fall, his partner already moving in. Lena froze for a fraction of a second, torn between instinct and fear. Hale's voice cut through the chaos, calm and unhurried. Lena, this is your last chance. Don't make this harder. Grace intercepted the second man, grabbing his wrist and twisting hard until his flashlight clattered to the ground. It rolled toward Lena, spilling white light across the alley, and that's when she saw it. At the far end, behind a half-collapsed fence, was a narrow gap leading into darkness. Go! Grace shouted again, her voice cracking. Lena's pulse roared in her ears. She took a step toward the gap, then stopped, looking back. Grace was holding her own, but barely. The first man was up again, closing in. Holly hadn't moved from where he stood, but his eyes were locked on Lena, patient. Like a predator waiting for the right moment. Lena. Grace's tone was desperate now. She had seconds. Run, and she might never see Grace again. Stay, and she'd be caught, dragged back to whatever facility Holly had in mind. Her hand clenched around the envelope in her pocket. Feeling the fragile weight of her mother's letter, Lena made her choice. She bolted for the gap. Shouts erupted behind her. Something slammed into the chain-link fence as she slipped through the opening, the cold metal scraping her jacket. She hit the other side running, boots pounding over uneven ground, but before the darkness swallowed her, she heard Hale's voice one last time, low and certain. You can run all you want, Lena. We always get our subjects back. Branches slapped against her arms as Lena tore through the tree line, the cold air burning in her lungs. She didn't dare look back, afraid that the moment she did, she'd see Hale's pale eyes closing in. The ground beneath her boots softened from broken asphalt to damp soil. The sound of engines and shouts faded until all she could hear was her own heartbeat and the ragged draw of her breath. She slowed, just enough to get her bearings. The forest was different here, denser, older. The trunks thick and gnarled like they'd been watching for centuries. Moonlight barely pierced the canopy, turning everything into shifting shades of silver and black. She took another step, and a voice came from the darkness ahead. Don't move. Lena froze. This voice wasn't Hale's, warmer, quieter. Threaded with authority. A figure stepped out from behind one of the trees. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather coat. His hair was dark except for a streak of white at the temple, and his eyes gray and steadied her, like he was confirming something he'd only heard about until now. You're Lena. he said, not as a question. Her breath caught. Who are you? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal object. Holding it out in his palm, it was a pendant, round, tarnished, with a faded engraving of a wave curling over the word Clearwater. I've been looking for you for a long time, he said. Your mother sent me. The words hit her harder than the sprint she'd just run. My mother's dead. His gaze didn't waver. That's what they wanted you to believe. For a moment, the forest felt impossibly still, as if even the wind was waiting for her reaction. Lena's fingers tightened around the envelope in her pocket. If you know something, tell me. Tell me the truth. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the darkness. Not here. If they're in the town, it won't be long before they start sweeping the woods. We need to move. She hesitated only a second before following him into the deeper shadows, the pendant still glinting faintly in his hand. Somewhere behind them, faint but distinct, came the echo of Hale's voice calling her name. The forest seemed to close around them as they moved, branches weaving the canopy so thick it turned the moon into a pale fractured glow overhead. The man's stride was long and deliberate, his boots finding silent paths between roots and stones, as if he'd walked this way 100 times. Lena kept close but far enough to watch his every move. The adrenaline from the chase still buzzed in her blood, but now there was something heavier under it, a dangerous kind of hope. She broke the silence first. If you knew my mother, if she really sent you, then where is she? He didn't look back. Alive, but not free. Her pulse stumbled. Where? A facility much like the one you were taken to as a child. Tighter security, fewer mistakes. Getting in is nearly impossible. Getting out, he let the words hang, takes more than just luck. They stepped over a fallen log, its surface slick with moss. You still haven't told me your name, she said. Rogan, he replied after a beat. Your mother called me Miles. The name meant nothing to her, yet it landed with weight. Why didn't she come for me herself? She tried, Rogan said, his voice flat, like he'd had to explain this before. But they keep her under constant watch. Moving her would risk more than her life. They came to a narrow stream, the water dark and quick under the moonlight. Rogan crossed on a fallen tree trunk without hesitation, turning only once to see if she'd follow. She did, carefully, her shoes slipping slightly on the damp bark. On the other side, he slowed for the first time since they'd met. We're close. To what? A place they won't look for you. At least not right away. The trees thinned, opening into a clearing where the skeletal remains of an old ranger station stood. The wood was weathered, the windows boarded, but the roof was intact. A faded sign hung crooked above the door. Clearwater Reserve, Outpost 3. Lena stopped cold. Clearwater again? Rogan's gaze met hers. You think it was just a name they picked for a project? No, Lena, it's older than that. Older than both of us. And if you want the truth, you're going to have to face the place where it all began. Rogan pushed the warped door open with his shoulder. It groaned in protest, the sound loud in the stillness. Inside, the air was colder, carrying the faint scent of damp wood and rust. Stay close, he said, moving through the narrow entryway into a main room littered with old furniture. A desk sat against the far wall, its drawers half open, papers scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. Lena's eyes swept the space. This doesn't look like much of a safe house. It's not, Rogan replied. It's a lockbox. He knelt beside the desk, feeling under the edge until his fingers found something. With a sharp twist, a hidden latch clicked, and the bottom drawer slid forward, not out, but sideways, revealing a metal hatch beneath. Help me with this. Together they hauled the hatch open, revealing a set of narrow steps descending into darkness. The air rising from below was cooler still, carrying a faint hum like electricity running somewhere far away. Rogan took out a small flashlight, and descended first. Lena followed, her hand brushing the damp concrete wall for balance. The steps ended in a small underground room, no bigger than a storage closet, but lined floor to ceiling with steel shelves. On the shelves sat boxes, dozens of them, each marked with a single word in black ink, "Archive." Rogan pulled one down, blew the dust from its lid, and set it on the floor. Inside were stacks of manila folders, reel-to-reel tapes, and most unsettling rows of photographs in plastic sleeves. Lena knelt beside him, pulling one photo at random. It was in black and white, grainy but clear enough to see the image. A hospital room, a newborn in an incubator, a woman in the corner watching through the glass. The woman was her mother. Lena's breath caught. This is the day I was born." Rogan's eyes stayed on her. "And the day they tagged you for Clearwater." He reached into the box again, pulling out a reel-to-reel tape labeled with her name and a date 6 months after her birth. "You need to see what's on these," he said. "But once you do, there's no going back to not knowing." Before she could answer, a faint thud echoed from above, then another. Slow, deliberate. They weren't alone. The sound above them came again, closer this time. A floorboard creaked. Slow and heavy, like whoever was up there knew exactly where to step. Rogan's jaw tightened. "We've got maybe 30 seconds. Lena glanced around at the shelves. "There's too much here. We can't just leave it. If we try to take everything, we won't make it out," he said, already flipping through folders with quick, precise hands. "We grab what's critical and move." "But how do you know what's this?" he interrupted, pulling a slim black case from the back of a shelf. "Master index. It's got every location, every subject number, every connection. If we have this, we can find the rest later." The footsteps above shifted direction, heading toward where the hatch was hidden. Dust sifted down from the ceiling in thin streams. Lena's gaze fell to the reel-to-reel tape with her name on it. "I'm taking this." Rogan gave her a sharp look, but didn't argue. "Fine, now move." He stuffed the black case into his coat, and she tucked the tape inside her jacket, feeling the cold metal press against her ribs. A muffled thump, then the faint, metallic scrape of the hatch's latch being tested. Rogan killed the flashlight. They were plunged into blackness, the only sound their breathing. He leaned close, his voice barely a breath. "There's a service tunnel at the back, quiet and fast." They shuffled toward the far wall, fingers brushing cold steel until Rogan found the narrow door. He eased it open, revealing a low passage that smelled of damp earth and rusted iron. As they slipped inside, the hatch above them groaned open. A beam of light speared into the archive room, sweeping over the empty space where they'd been just seconds before. The service tunnel was barely high enough for them to crouch walk. Moisture dripped from the curved ceiling, each drop hitting the packed earth with a faint, steady patter. The air was cold and smelled of rust, mold, and something older, like the inside of a place that hadn't been touched in decades. Rogan moved ahead, his silhouette just a darker shadow in the black. Lena followed, one hand on the wall for balance, the other clutching the tape against her chest. The sound of footsteps above faded, replaced by something more unsettling, a faint vibration under their feet. Rogan paused mid-step. "They're moving a vehicle," he murmured, "trying to cut us off at the other end." Lena's pulse quickened. "Can they even get into the tunnel?" "They don't have to. They just have to be waiting when we come out." They pushed forward faster, the tunnel twisting left, then right. Somewhere ahead, Lena spotted the faintest glimmer, a thin strip of moonlight, spilling through a grated exit. Her relief lasted all of 3 seconds. Rogan reached the grate first and froze. "Damn it." Lena came up beside him and saw the problem. The metal bars were bent inward, and beyond them, a stack of heavy crates had been deliberately piled against the outside, sealing the exit completely. "Looks like someone knew about this tunnel," Rogan said grimly. Behind them, faint but growing, came the sound of boots on metal, the clang of someone dropping down through the hatch. Into the archive room. Lena's throat tightened. We're trapped. Rogan turned sharply, scanning the tunnel walls with the beam of a small penlight he'd kept hidden. He pressed one hand against a section where the earth looked looser. Help me here. They dug with their hands dirt, crumbling under their fingers until Rogan hit something solid, a rusted maintenance door half buried in the wall. He wrenched it open just as a flashlight beam appeared behind them in the tunnel, sweeping closer. Rogan shoved her through the opening. Go, Lena, now! She stumbled into another narrow passage, the air colder here, tinged with the metallic tang of water. Rogan squeezed in behind her and slammed the door shut just as a voice echoed from the tunnel they'd left. She's close. Don't let her get out this time. The passage tilted downward almost immediately, the floor slick with moisture. Lena could hear the faint rush of water somewhere ahead, echoing off stone walls. The air was colder here, damp enough to seep through her jacket, and every sound, every breath seemed amplified. Rogan's voice was low but urgent. This is part of the old drainage system. Back when Clearwater used the outposts, they ran supply tunnels and storm channels beneath them. Most are collapsed. Most? Lena asked. Yeah, which means the ones still open usually have a reason for it. They rounded a corner, and the space widened into a larger chamber, arched stone overhead, water trickling through a channel in the center. Rusted maintenance ladders climbed up into darkness, some broken, some intact. Rogan moved toward one ladder but froze mid-step, lifting a hand for silence. Lena stopped breathing. That's when she heard it, a faint metallic clink, like something tapping against steel, followed by the scrape of a boot on whetstone. Not from behind them this time, but from further ahead, deeper in the Kung. Rogan's eyes narrowed. He whispered, "We're not alone down here." A low voice drifted from the shadows ahead, carrying an unsettling calm. "Rogan Miles, thought you were smarter than to use the tunnels." Lena's chest tightened. The figure stepped into the faint light from Rogan's penlight, revealing a tall man in a dark tactical coat, his face half hidden by shadow. But what Lena noticed first wasn't his face, it was the pendant around his neck, identical to the one Rogan had shown her in. The forest. Her mind raced. Who is he? Rogan's tone was flat, dangerous. An old friend who made the wrong choice. The man smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. And you're carrying something you shouldn't, Miles. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let the girl walk out of here. Rogan shifted his stance, subtly moving himself between Lena and the man. Not going to happen. The man tilted his head, studying Lena. You don't even know what you've got there, do you? That tape could end everything or end you. And they'd rather it be the second one. From somewhere far behind them in the tunnel came the faint echo of more voices closing in. The man in the tactical coat smiled wider. Looks like you're running out of exits. The water in the channel seemed to rush louder, though Lena knew it was just her pulse roaring in her ears. Rogan didn't move, his body angled to keep her shielded. The man in the tactical coat, his old friend, stood perfectly still, like he had all the time in the world. From the darkness behind them, the voices were growing clearer. The echo distorted them, but Lena picked out Hale's tone, instantly calm, patient, certain. The man in the coat flicked his eyes toward the sound, and then back to Rogan. You're not walking out with her, Miles, not with that tape, you know what it means if it gets out. Rogan's voice was low, but steel-edged. It means the truth doesn't die in a locked room. The man's hand shifted toward his coat pocket, just slightly, but enough for Rogan to react. In a blur, Rogan shoved Lena sideways toward the channel wall. Stay down. A flash of metal. Rogan's knife caught the dim light as he lunged. The man sidestepped fast, the two of them colliding in the narrow space with a sound that echoed down the tunnel like a gunshot. Lena scrambled back, the cold stone soaking through her jeans. She could see Hale's team's flashlights, starting to bounce off the far walls behind them. The man in the coat wrenched Rogan's arm, sending the knife clattering into the water. He swung a punch, but Rogan ducked, driving him back toward one of the ladders. "Go, Lena," Rogan shouted, his voice hoarse. "Now." She hesitated, looking between them and the growing lights down the tunnel. The man in the coat caught Rogan with a knee to the ribs, forcing a grunt from him. Then his gaze snapped to her. "If you run now, they'll catch you. If you stay, I'll take you myself." Her fingers closed around the reel-to-reel tape inside her jacket, the metal cold as ice. She could hear Hale's voice clearly now. Only yards away, she had two choices: climb the ladder and take her chances with wherever it led, or stay in the tunnel and risk being trapped between both men and the incoming team. Rogan locked eyes with her. Just for a second, and she knew which one he wanted. She turned toward the ladder. The ladder was slick with condensation, each rung biting cold into her palms. Lena climbed fast, her breath loud in her ears, the shouts and scuffling below growing more distant with every movement upward. The air changed as she rose, less damp, sharper, tinged with something faintly metallic. She reached a circular hatch at the top, its surface mottled with rust. She pressed against it, expecting resistance, but it swung upward with surprising ease, letting in a flood of pale moonlight. Lena hauled herself out, boots crunching onto gravel. She blinked against the sudden open air. The hatch was tucked behind a chain-link fence that sagged with age, half hidden by wild shrubs. Beyond that fence stretched a wide, empty lot, cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through, the ghost outlines of painted lines for parking spaces long unused. But it wasn't abandoned. A lone figure stood about 20 feet away, backlit by a flickering street lamp. The glow caught the edges of a hood pulled low over their head. They didn't move, just watched her with an unnerving stillness. Lena's first instinct was to run, but something in the figure's posture made her hesitate. They slowly lifted one hand, holding something small and rectangular between two fingers. Her breath hitched. It was a Polaroid photograph. She stepped closer, cautious. The figure tilted the photo toward the light. Even from a distance she could see it herself as a child, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. And next to her was her mother. Lena's voice cracked. "Where did you get that?" The figure finally spoke, the voice quiet but clear. "From the same place they're trying to take you back to." The words sent a chill crawling up her spine. "Who are you?" They lowered the hood just enough for her to see a woman's face, lined with exhaustion but sharp-eyed, resolute. "Someone who owes your mother more than I can ever repay. And right now, I'm your only way out." From below, in the tunnel, a man's voice shouted her name, Hale's voice, close enough to make her blood run cold. The woman extended her free hand toward Lena. "Decide, right now." Lena's lungs burned from the climb, from the chase, from the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. The woman's outstretched hand looked steady, but Lena could see the tension in her knuckles, the urgency in her eyes. Below, in the tunnel, Rogan's voice cut through the chaos, hoarse, raw. "Go, Lena, don't stop." It was followed by the clang of metal against stone, a grunt, then silence. Her heart lurched. The woman stepped closer, the Polaroid still between her fingers. "If you go back down there, you won't save him. You'll just hand them, both of you." Lena's mind spun. Rogan had risked everything for her since the night in the forest. He had answers about her mother, about Clearwater, but so did this stranger. And if Hale's team reached the ladder before she decided, she'd lose any choice at all. The sound of boots on metal rungs echoed upward from the hatch. They were climbing, fast. The woman's voice hardened. "Lena, now." Lena's gaze flicked from the Polaroid to the hatch, then back to the woman. Her fingers tightened on the tape inside her jacket until her nails bit into her palm. She took a step toward the woman, then stopped dead when a sharp crack split the air. Not from the tunnel, but from somewhere beyond the fence. A rifle shot. The street lamp overhead flickered once, twice, and went dark dot in the sudden gloom. Lena couldn't see the woman's face anymore, only the faint white square of the Polaroid drifting closer. As if urging her forward. From below, Hale's voice rose, almost casual. "Whichever way you run, Lena, we'll be right behind you." Her pulse pounded. She had 3 seconds to decide. She moved. The first thing Lena noticed was the change in sound. The tunnel noise, Hal's boots on the ladder. Rogan's shouts faded behind her like a door closing on a nightmare. Now it was just her own breathing, quick and shallow, and the crunch of gravel beneath her boots as she followed the woman toward the far edge of the lot. The Polaroid was still in the woman's hand, gripped tightly enough that the edges curled. Every few steps, Lena's eyes flicked to it, to the faint image of her younger self and her mother. She couldn't look at it too long without feeling like the ground might tilt under her. They reached the fence, the chain link sagging low where the woman kicked aside a section already cut open. She gestured for Lena to go first. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. "Somewhere quiet," the woman replied, her voice clipped but not unkind. "Somewhere they won't look for you. Not yet." Lena hesitated only a second before ducking. Through the gap, the street beyond was silent except for the distant hum of a transformer. Storefronts sat dark and shuttered, their signs faded, their windows streaked with years of dust. The whole place felt abandoned, but not forgotten, like someone had pressed pause on it decades ago. The woman kept moving, her stride purposeful, until they reached a squat brick building with boarded-up windows. She unlocked the door with a key that looked older than the lock itself. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and machine oil. "This used to be a print shop," she said, guiding Lena past an old press toward a back room. "Now it's something else." The room beyond was windowless, lit only by a single hanging bulb. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, and a battered desk sat in the corner. On the desk was a laptop, closed, and beside it a second Polaroid camera. Lena turned to face her. "You still haven't told me your name." The woman paused, then said, "Call me Mara." It didn't sound like her real name, but Lena let it go for now. Mara set the original Polaroid down gently on the desk. "I worked with your mother once, long before Clearwater became what it is now. Back then, we thought we were building something to protect people. And now?" Lena asked. "Now it's about control. And you." Mara's gaze flicked to the tape bulging in Lena's jacket pocket. "You're holding something that could strip that control from them." Lena swallowed hard. "Then why not take it from me yourself? You could have just grabbed it back there." "Because it's not mine," Mara said simply. "And because if anyone's going to decide whether the world hears what's on it, it should be you." The simplicity of that answer unsettled Lena more than a threat would have. She sat down heavily on the edge of the desk, the weight of the tape in her jacket suddenly heavier. Mara crossed to one of the filing cabinets, unlocking it with a small key. She pulled out a folder and set it in front of Lena. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy, black and white shots of Rogan, some recent, some years old. In a few, Lena was there too, caught mid-step, unaware she was being watched. "They've been tracking you for longer than you think," Mara said. "Not just since the accident. The moment you crossed paths with Rogan, you were back on their radar." Lena's skin prickled. "So saving me, it was a mistake for him?" Mara shook her head. "No, it was the only right thing he's done in years, but it put a target on both of you." They both turned as a noise rattled faintly from the front of the shop. "Just the building settling, maybe. Or maybe not." Mara's eyes narrowed. "We can't stay here long. There's a safe route out of the city, but it means passing through one of their checkpoints." Lena's chest tightened. "And if they recognize me, then you better decide what you're willing to give up to stay free." She didn't elaborate, Just started packing, slipping the Polaroid camera into a canvas bag, tucking a pistol into the waistband of her jeans. Lena's gaze fell to the tape again. The urge to listen to it right now was almost unbearable. "What's on here, Mara?" Mara stopped in the doorway, her face unreadable. "The day your mother stopped trusting Clearwater. And the reason they've been chasing you ever since." The bulb above them flickered once, then steadied. "Finish whatever you need to do here," Mara said. "We leave in 5. Lena nodded, but her mind was far from steady. After the quiet, she realized, comes the part where you decide whether to live with the truth or die for it. They slipped out of the print shop just before dawn, when the streets were still quiet, and the sky was a pale, colorless gray. Mara kept her hood low and her pace steady, not too fast, not too slow. Lena followed her lead, tucking her hair under a knit cap Mara had handed her. The tape pressed flat against her ribs inside her jacket. The city felt different at this hour. Empty storefronts loomed like hollow eyes, and the only movement came from trash caught in the wind, skittering across the cracked pavement. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, sharp and sudden, then fell silent. "We keep to the side streets," Mara said without looking back. "The main roads will have cameras." They cut through an alley that smelled faintly of engine oil and damp concrete, emerging onto a narrow road that wound toward the edge of the city. Up ahead, Lena saw the checkpoint, 2 concrete barriers funneling traffic into a single lane, a portable booth, and 3 uniformed men with rifles slung over their shoulders. Her throat tightened. "They're armed. They don't need to shoot you," Mara said. "They just need to scan you." Lena's heart sank. "And if I fail the scan? Then we improvise." The closer they got, the louder the hum of the portable generator powering the booth became. A single truck was waiting to pass, its driver leaning out the window to hand over papers. The men checked them with bored efficiency, then waved him through. Mara adjusted the strap of her canvas bag, her voice low. "Let me do the talking. You just keep your head down." They reached the booth. One of the guards, a tall man with close-cropped hair and a weathered face, stepped forward. His eyes swept over Lena briefly, then returned to Mara. "Papers," he said. Mara handed over a folded document without hesitation. The guard unfolded it, glanced at it, then at her. "Where's your companion's ID?" "She's my niece," Mara said smoothly, "visiting from out of state. Lost her wallet on the bus 2 nights ago." The guard's gaze slid to Lena again, lingering this time. "We're checking all inbound and outbound movements. High alert. There's a person of interest matching her age and build." Lena kept her eyes on the ground, her pulse hammering. The guard took a step closer. "Look at me, miss." She did, forcing her expression to stay blank. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the man's radio crackled. A voice came through. "Sharp, Unit 12, possible match at your position." The guard's hand dropped to the scanner on his belt. "Step over here, miss." Mara's tone didn't change, but there was iron in it. "Is that really necessary?" "Protocol," the guard said. The scanner was inches from Lena's arm when a shout came from further down the road. Another guard waved frantically, pointing toward a sedan that had stopped short of the checkpoint. The driver was yelling something about an engine fire. All 3 guards turned their attention to the commotion. Mara moved instantly, slipping a folded bill into the first guard's hand and steering Lena through the barrier in the confusion. They didn't stop moving until the checkpoint was far behind them, the city shrinking in the distance. Lena finally exhaled. That was close. Mara didn't slow her pace. "Closer than you think." That call to the guard? "That means they know you're moving. We just bought ourselves a little time, not safety." Lena touched the tape through her jacket, feeling the hard edge against her palm. She had thought the danger might ease once they escaped the city. Now she knew better. They walked for over an hour after clearing the checkpoint, keeping to narrow backroads and old service lanes, where the asphalt had long since cracked and weeds had forced their way through. The city had dissolved into a smear of low rooftops behind them, the air quieter now, holding that strange stillness that comes before a storm. Fields stretched out on either side, dry winter grass whispering in the wind. A rusted water tower stood crooked in the distance, its paint faded to a ghost of a name Lena couldn't read. Mara moved with the precision of someone who had traveled this route dozens of times before. She didn't check a map, didn't hesitate. At intersections, Lena followed, each step making her more aware of how far she was from everything she'd known, and how there was no clear way back. Finally, they reached a small stand of trees at the edge of a field. Tucked inside, almost invisible until they were on top of it, was a squat cabin, its roof sagging under years of neglect. A single chimney jutted upward, and a narrow porch ran along the front. Mara approached the door and knocked twice, then, once more after a pause. The door opened just enough for a single brown eye to appear in the gap. "It's me," Mara said. The door swung open to reveal a man in his late 50s, his hair silver at the temples, his shoulders still broad despite the years. He looked Lena up and down once, then stepped aside to let them in. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee gone cold. Maps were tacked to one wall, red string connecting pins across states. On the table sat an old reel-to-reel player, the first thing Lena's eyes locked onto, Mara noticed. "That's why we're here," she said quietly. "If you want to hear the tape, this is the safest place you'll get for a while." Lena hesitated, her fingers brushing the inside of her jacket where the tape rested. She looked from Mara to the man. "And who's he?" "Elias," Mara said. "An archivist. He used to work in Clearwater's records division, back when your mother—" She stopped herself, glancing at Elias. He met Lena's gaze. "Your mother was smarter than all of us. And she knew one day this tape would have to be heard." Lena's breath caught. "Then you know what's on it?" Elias shook his head. "No, I was never allowed near it. I just know she risked everything to get it out. And if Holly wants it this badly—" He let the sentence die there, but the weight of it hung in the air. Mara set her bag down. "We'll play it when you're ready. But once you do, there's no going back. The quiet ends the second that machine starts." Through the cabin's single window, Lena could see the horizon shifting, a dark shape moving across the fields. At first she thought it was just the wind in the grass. Then she realized it was a convoy of black SUVs. They weren't as safe as Mara had promised. Mara was already at the window, her jaw tight. "They moved faster than I thought." Elias stepped away from the table, pulling a worn duffel from beneath it. Inside, Lena caught a glimpse of a shotgun, a box of shells, and a folded map stained with coffee. "We can't outrun them on foot," he said flatly. "Best chance is to hold them off long enough to move the girl." Lena's pulse spiked. "Move me where?" "Anywhere but here," Elias replied. But Mara's eyes were fixed on the tape still inside Lena's jacket. "No, we end this now. If we get the contents out, there's no reason for them to keep hunting you." Lena shook her head. "Or they'll come after me harder." Outside, the low growl of engines grew louder. She could see dust kicking up from the field as the SUVs closed in, their black paint swallowing what little light the overcast sky offered. Elias grabbed the reel-to-reel player, setting it on the table and plugging it into an old generator in the corner. The machine gave a low hum, like it was waking from a long sleep. "Once this starts, it can't be stopped without destroying the tape." Mara turned to Lena. "This is your call. Listen now or burn it. If you listen, you'll know the truth about your mother. If you burn it, you might stay alive a little longer." The first SUV rolled to a stop just beyond the tree line. Doors slammed. Boots hit the ground. Through the thin cabin walls, Lena could hear Hale's voice calm, almost conversational. "Lena, I know you're in there. We can talk about this." Her hand hovered over the tape. She could feel every notch on its metal reel through the fabric of her jacket. Her chest tightened until breathing hurt. Mara's voice cut through the noise outside. "Choose, Lena, right now." Lena's fingers closed around the tape. The generator hummed. Hale's voice came again, closer this time. She lifted the tape toward the player, and the cabin door exploded inward. The cabin door blew open with a deafening crack, splinters spraying across the room like shrapnel. The force knocked Lena back against the table. The tape clutched in her hands. Two men in tactical black pushed through first, rifles sweeping the room. Behind them, Hale stepped in composed, immaculate even in the chaos. His gaze locked on Lena instantly. "Don't," Mara warned, her hand hovering near the pistol at her waistband. Hale's eyes flicked to her, cold and dismissive. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Elias didn't wait for negotiations. He yanked the tape from Lena's grip, slid it onto the reel-to-reel, and hit the switch. The machine whirred to life, a low hiss filling the air. Hale's composure cracked for the first time. Shut it off. But it was too late. A voice crackled through the old speaker, female, steady, with the faint echo of a room too large for her. "Comfort. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it back. My name is Claire Rowan, and Clearwater is not what it claims to be." Lena's breath caught. Claire Rowan, her mother. The soldiers moved forward, but Mara stepped into their path, gun drawn. Elias stayed at the machine, one hand steadying the reels as they turned. Outside, more boots pounded across the porch. The cabin walls trembled under the weight of bodies pressing in. The recording continued. "They built it to protect, but it became a prison. And the ones who run it, Hale. Among them will erase anyone who stands in their way, even me." Hale lunged forward, shoving past his men, but Mara's shot cracked through the air, grazing the doorframe inches from his head. Lena was frozen, every muscle locked, her ears full of her mother's voice. She'd imagined hearing it again for years, but never like this, never with Hale's shadow looming over her, and the certainty that every word might be her last free moment. The tape hissed on. "Lena, if you get this, trust no one from Clearwater. Not even Rogan." The room seemed to tilt. Hale roared, "Enough," and reached for the machine. Elias slammed his palm onto the table, knocking the player sideways. The reels spun wildly. The tape still running. Through the noise, the last words before the chaos swallowed everything. "The truth is in the vault under." The sound cut out as the machine hit the floor. Gunfire erupted, deafening in the small cabin. The air filled with the acrid bite of gunpowder, the crack of splintering wood. Mara fired twice, forcing the first wave of Hale's men to dive for cover. "Lena, move!" she shouted, shoving her toward the back door. But Hale was already cutting across the room, his hand closing around Lena's arm like a vice. "You're coming with me." Lena twisted, driving her elbow into his ribs. He staggered, and she tore free, nearly tripping over the fallen reel-to-reel. The tape lay tangled on the floor like spilled guts, still whispering with the static of a voice that had been silenced mid-sentence. "The truth is in the vault under." And then nothing but hiss. She didn't have time to rewind, to save the rest. Mara grabbed her by the collar and yanked her toward a narrow hallway at the back. Behind them, Elias covered their retreat, the shotgun booming, the recoil rocking his frame. They burst through the back door into the cold bite of open air. Smoke was already seeping from the cabin windows. "This way." Mara dragged Lena toward the tree line. Bullets snapped through branches overhead, tearing bark into splinters. Somewhere behind them, Hal's voice bellowed orders, cold and furious. They plunged into the woods, the ground uneven beneath their boots. Lena's lungs burned, every breath tearing at her throat. But the words from the tape kept replaying in her head. looping over and over. The vault under, the vault under. After what felt like miles, Mara slowed, pressing her back to a thick oak. She scanned the shadows, listening. The pursuit had thinned, but it hadn't stopped. Lena clutched her knees, trying to catch her breath. "We lost it," she gasped. "The rest of the message, we still have enough," Mara said. "A vault narrows it down. And I know where Clearwater keeps its deepest secrets." Lena lifted her head. "You do?" Mara's gaze was sharp, almost grim. "Yes, but getting in will make this." She gestured back toward the cabin, toward the smoke rising through the treetops. "Look like a warm-up." Somewhere behind them, a single gunshot rang out, echoing through the woods. Mara didn't flinch, but Lena's stomach turned cold. She didn't need to ask who it might have been. They moved deeper into the woods, following a narrow deer trail that twisted through the undergrowth. The smoke from the cabin was a faint smear in the distance now, but the tension in Mara's movements told Lena they weren't safe yet. After nearly an hour, the trees thinned, opening onto a ridge. Below, nestled in a hollow, was a squat concrete structure half buried in the earth. It had no windows, only a single reinforced door, and a thin antenna jutting from the roof. "That's it," Mara said quietly. Lena stared. "That's the vault?" "Not the vault itself. This is an access point. The vault's underground, miles of corridors and sealed chambers. And more armed men than you've ever seen in one place. How do we even get in?" Lena asked. Mara pulled a folded photograph from her jacket. It showed the same structure, but years earlier, with scaffolding around it. "There's a drainage conduit here." She tapped the corner of the image. "It was supposed to be sealed after construction, but my contact says it never was. We can use it, if we can get to it without tripping every alarm." From their vantage point, Lena could see 2 guards pacing near the front door and a third perched in a raised lookout post. A security camera swept the clearing in slow arcs. Mara crouched low, tracing the path with her eyes. "We wait until the shift change. That's when they'll be most distracted." Lena glanced at her, hesitating. "Mara, about what my mother said. Why would she tell me not to trust Rogan?" Mara didn't look away from the vault. "Because sometimes the people who save you are the same people who put you in danger in the first place." The words landed like a stone in Lena's chest. As the light faded, the air grew colder. The guards lit a cigarette near the front, their faces briefly illuminated in the glow. Somewhere behind them, Lena heard the low rumble of approaching engines too. Many for just a shift change. Mara's jaw tightened. "They're reinforcing. Someone tipped them off." Lena's stomach dropped. "Then the conduit. We take it now," Mara said, already moving. "Before they lock it down." The drainage conduit was little more than a rusted metal pipe half hidden beneath a tangle of dead vines. Mara dropped to her knees, pulling a folding pry bar from her pack. With a grunt, she levered the corroded grate free and slid it silently. "Aside. Go," she whispered. Lena crouched, peering into the dark throat of the pipe. The air inside smelled of damp concrete and something metallic, like old blood. She swallowed hard, then crawled in, her palms scraping against grit and rust. Mara followed, replacing the grate behind them. The tunnel was just wide enough to crawl through on hands and knees. Their knees thudded against the metal in a steady rhythm, the sound amplified in the cramped space. Every few yards, Lena glanced back to make sure Mara was still there. After what felt like an eternity, the pipe widened into a junction chamber. Water trickled along the edges, pooling in shallow depressions. A ladder led upward to a rusted hatch. Mara pressed her ear to it, listening. Then, with a slow turn of the wheel, she pushed it open an inch. They emerged into a dimly lit corridor. The air was colder here, unnaturally still. The walls were lined with numbered steel doors, each one sealed with a heavy locking mechanism. "This is part of the outer vault," Mara murmured. "The inner levels are deeper." Lena's voice was barely a whisper. And what's in the inner levels? Mara gave her a sharp look. Whatever your mother died trying to keep from them. They moved quietly down the hall, the hum of fluorescent lights above the only sound. As they turned a corner, Lena froze. At the far end of the corridor stood Rogan. He wasn't armed, at least not visibly, and he wasn't wearing tactical black. His clothes were plain, his hands empty. But his expression was unreadable, somewhere between relief and something darker. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. His voice carried easily in the sterile air. "But you should know you're already too late." Mara's hand hovered near her gun. "Step aside, Rogan." He didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, battered cassette tape, the same size and make as the one Lena had risked everything to save. Only this one had her mother's handwriting on the label. The sight of the tape in Rogan's hand felt like a punch to the ribs. The handwriting was unmistakable sharp. Slanted letters that Lena had seen 100 times in old birthday cards, and notes slipped into her school lunches. Her mother's writing, but the part that lodged in Lena's throat was the label, Vault 7, Contingency. Mara stepped in front of Lena, her stance coiled and ready. "Where did you get that?" Rogan didn't answer her. His eyes stayed locked on Lena. "You've been chasing the wrong piece all along. That reel-to-reel, it was bait. Halle wanted you to find it. He knew the moment it started playing, he'd have your location, and it worked." Lena's pulse thudded in her ears. "You were working with him?" A flicker of hurt crossed Rogan's face, or maybe it was something else. Something too quick to read. "I was working around him. There's a difference." "Not enough of one," Mara snapped. "Move, now." He took a step closer, ignoring the gun still hovering near Mara's side. "Lena, listen to me. This tape, this one, is what your mother risked everything to hide. The other was a warning. This is the plan." Lena's mouth was dry. "Plan for what?" "For what happens when Clearwater falls," Rogan said quietly. She wasn't trying to destroy it outright. She was preparing for the moment it would collapse under its own weight. And she wanted you to finish it. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, like they were straining. Somewhere far down the corridor, the echo of boots on concrete drifted toward them. Mara's voice was low and sharp. "We don't have time for this. Either you're with us, or you're in our way." Rogan's gaze didn't waver. "I'm with her, always was. But if you want this tape to mean anything, we can't take it upstairs. There's a listening room deeper in the vault, shielded from the outside. That's where we play it, if we can get there before Hailstein locks down." This level. Lena's mind was a jumble of questions, of mistrust tangled with the part of her that wanted desperately to believe him. The boots were louder now, joined by the muffled click of radios. Mara glanced at Lena. "Your call." The air between them felt like a held breath. Lena looked at Rogan, at the tape, at Mara's tense profile. "We go," she said finally. "But if this is a trap," "It's not," Rogan cut in. "And you'll know soon enough." They moved quickly, Rogan leading them down a side corridor marked with faded hazard stripes. The walls here were thicker, the air colder. Lena tried to ignore how the hum of the lights seemed to fade as they went deeper, replaced by the steady thump of her own heartbeat. At the end of the hall, Rogan stopped at a steel door with no handle, only a narrow slot at eye level. He pulled a keycard from his pocket, old, scratched, and slid it into a hidden reader. The lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. Inside, the room was small, windowless, and lined with a dull metal sheeting that absorbed sound. A single table sat. In the center, a cassette player waiting on top. Rogan set the tape down with surprising care. "Once we play this, there's no going back. We'll have maybe 5 minutes before the whole vault knows exactly where we are." Lena stepped forward. Her hands were steady, though she wasn't sure why they felt steadier than her heart did. "Then we'd better start." Rogan slid the tape into the player, pressed play, and stepped back. Her mother's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, you've made it past the outer levels. Good. That means you've survived what they put in your way. But you won't survive what's coming without this information." Lena closed her eyes. For a moment, it was just her and the sound of her mother speaking, as if the years between them had collapsed into this single, impossible instant. The voice continued. "Vault 7 is not just a repository, it's an ark. They built it to preserve what they couldn't control: files, names, evidence. And if you open it, you'll find the one thing Clearwater fears more than exposure: proof that their founders never intended to protect anyone at all." Mara leaned forward, her face taut. Rogan didn't move. The tape hissed, then her mother's voice dropped lower, as if she were leaning closer to the microphone. "Lena, if you've trusted Rogan this far, you'll need to decide if you still can. His part in this was never meant to be clean. But without him, you won't make it out alive." The words hit like a blow. Lena's eyes flew to Rogan, who stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on the player. Outside the room, the sound of boots had returned, and they were close. Her mother's voice pressed on. "Urgent now. The vault is wired to a dead man's switch. Once it's triggered, you'll have 1 hour to take what you can and escape before it all burns. The key is in." The door shook violently as someone tried to force it. The tape kept spinning. The steel door jolted under another heavy impact, the sound reverberating through the small shielded room. Dust sifted down from the frame, catching. In the cold fluorescent light, Mara was already moving, wedging herself against the table for cover, pistol aimed at the entrance. "They'll blow the lock next," she said, her voice clipped. 2 minutes, maybe less. The tape kept running, her mother's voice cutting through the tension. "The key is in Section 4, Chamber Delta, hidden behind the false archive wall. Don't trust the inventory, it's not listed. Once you have it, you'll know why they fear it." Another slam hit the door, this one followed by the unmistakable screech of metal grinding against metal. Lena could hear someone outside shouting coordinates, military precision. Her mother's voice slowed, heavy now with something between warning and farewell. "If I don't make it back, Lena, remember this: you were never the mistake they told you you were. You were the reason." The last click of the tape snapped into silence. Lena stood frozen for half a breath, the weight of those words settling deep into her chest. "Time's up," Mara said, grabbing the tape and shoving it into Lena's jacket. "We move now or we're staying here forever." Rogan stepped toward the door. "I'll draw them off. You two take the maintenance shaft by the back wall. It'll drop you 1 level down close to Section 4. Mara narrowed her eyes. "That's suicide." "Better me than her," Rogan shot back, his gaze briefly locking on Lena before turning to the door. The pounding stopped suddenly. Silence thick enough to hear the faint hum of the lights settled over them. Lena realized they'd backed away from the door, not because they'd given up, because they were about to breach. Rogan ripped the safety pin from a smoke canister and lobbed it toward the doorframe just as the hinges blew with a concussive crack. Smoke filled the gap instantly, swallowing the silhouettes of armed men flooding in. "Go!" he barked, shoving Lena toward the wall panel Mara had already yanked open to reveal the narrow maintenance shaft. She hesitated, one hand braced on the frame. "Rogan," his voice was firm, final. "You'll know whether to trust me when you get to Delta." Then he turned, disappearing into the smoke with nothing but the glint of metal in his hand, and the muffled chaos of shouts and gunfire following after him. Mara dragged Lena into the shaft. They slid down the steep incline, the sound of the breach fading behind them, replaced by the hollow clang of metal beneath their boots. When they landed hard on the lower level, the air was different, denser, colder, and carrying a faint electrical. Ahead, the corridor stretched into darkness, lit only by intermittent strips of dying fluorescent lights. "This way," Mara whispered, moving toward the direction her mother had named. Section 4. Chamber Delta. Every step Lena took, she felt the weight of the cassette in her jacket pocket, and the heavier weight of not knowing whether the man who just stayed behind was the reason she was still alive or the reason she'd been hunted from the start. Section 4 was quieter than the rest of the vault, almost unnaturally so. The hum of machinery seemed muted here, as though the walls themselves were swallowing sound. The numbered chambers passed one by one Alpha, Bravo, Charlie until they reached the heavy steel door marked Delta in faded stenciling. A single red light glowed above the lock. "It's biometric," Mara muttered, studying the scanner. "We can't." Before she could finish, the light blinked green. The lock disengaged with a soft hiss. Lena stared at the reader. "How?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Either Rogan's still alive, or someone else wants us in here." The door swung open into a narrow room lined with shelves. At first glance, it looked like a standard archive, rows of dusty file boxes, labels curling at the edges. But when Lena stepped inside, the floor shifted slightly beneath her feet, like there was space beneath it. She moved to the far wall and ran her hands over the shelving. One section felt wrong, too shallow. The back panel cold and metallic instead of wood. "This is it," she said. Mara joined her, finding a small recessed latch hidden beneath a shelf lip. With a sharp tug, the entire panel swung inward, revealing a compartment no larger than a coffin. Inside, a black metal case sat alone on a raised plinth. The case had no markings, only a combination lock and a faint symbol etched into the steel, a circle split by a single vertical line. Lena stepped closer, the hairs on her arms rising. "That's the same symbol on my mother's pendant," she whispered. Mara nodded grimly. "Then it's definitely what she meant for you to find." Lena's fingers hovered over the lock. "If we open it here, they'll know. The moment it's unsealed, some system will trip. Then we take it and run," Mara said. But before Lena could lift it, a voice drifted from the doorway, calm, steady, and achingly familiar. "You won't get far with that." They both turned. Rogan stood there, breathing hard, a smear of blood across his temple. His eyes locked on Lena, not Mara. Not the case like the rest of the world had narrowed to just her. "You have to trust me now," he said quietly. "Because if you open that without me, it'll kill you before Clearwater even gets the chance." Rogan's words hung in the cold air of Chamber Delta. "If you open that without me, it'll kill you before Clearwater even gets the chance." Lena's fingers tightened on the black case. "Then tell me how to open it." He stepped inside, eyes flicking to Mara. "First, we seal the door. They're minutes behind me." Mara hesitated, then slammed the steel panel shut. The lock hissed into place, muffling the distant echoes of boots on concrete. Rogan moved to the case, kneeling. "This lock isn't just mechanical, it's wired. Wrong code triggers a burst charge inside." Lena's stomach knotted. "So, my mother left me a bomb?" "No," Rogan said, spinning the combination dials with practiced precision. "She left you proof. The bomb is Clearwater's insurance policy." The last dial clicked. The case opened with a soft sigh. Inside, wrapped in protective mylar, were rows of microfilm canisters, each labeled with dates, names, and sealed evidence. Tags. At the very bottom was a single envelope, marked in her mother's handwriting, for Lena. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Inside was a folded letter and a slim silver key. "Lena," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means Rogan kept his word and you lived long enough to make a choice. This key unlocks the master archive hidden beneath Clearwater's central registry. What you do with what's inside will define the rest of your life. Burn it, and you'll be safe. Release it, and the truth will out. But you may lose everything else." The thud of something heavy hitting the chamber door made her look up. The steel was beginning to dent inward. Mara's voice was sharp. "We're out of time." Rogan grabbed the case. The maintenance lift is 2 corridors over. It's our only way out before they seal the level." They ran. The vault seemed to vibrate around them as alarms began to wail, a deep, rising tone. That turned Lena's blood-cold dot at the lift. Rogan slammed the panel and forced the doors open. "Go!" he shouted. Mara pushed Lena inside, then stepped in after her. Rogan followed, hitting the control. The lift shuddered upward. Halfway up, gunfire erupted below. Bullets pinned off the steel as figures swarmed into view. One round grazed Rogan's shoulder. He grunted, but didn't let go of the case. When the lift finally reached the surface access, the daylight spilling in was blinding. They stumbled out into the open air, lungs heaving. Mara scanned the tree line. "We split here. I'll draw them off." Lena shook her head. "No, Lena," Mara cut in, her voice softening. "You need to get that key where it belongs. It's bigger than both of us." Before Lena could answer, Mara was already moving, vanishing into the trees with the sharp crack of gunfire chasing after her. Rogan and Lena pushed toward the ridge where it had all begun. The sirens faded behind them, replaced by the sound of the wind at the crest. Rogan stopped. "You still don't know if you can trust me," he said quietly. Lena met his eyes. "No, but I know my mother did." They stood there for a long moment, the case between them, the key in her pocket pressing like a weight against her leg. Finally, Lena turned toward the distant skyline. "Let's finish it." And together, they walked into the wind, the vault, and its secrets shrinking behind them until it was nothing but a shadow on the horizon. Epilogue. 6 months later, the city was quieter than she remembered. Maybe it was just her, the way her ears now searched for danger in every sudden sound. How her eyes lingered too long on shadows that moved in alleys. Lena sat at a corner table in a small cafe, steam curling from her mug of coffee. Outside, rain streaked the windows, blurring the afternoon traffic into a slow, shimmering flow. A folded newspaper lay beside her. The headline was bold, impossible to miss. "Clearwater collapses under whistleblower Violeta West." Below it, smaller text listed resignations, indictments, and the opening of long-sealed investigations. Entire columns of names were printed, names she had seen on the microfilm, names her mother had whispered in the dark. A quiet clink made her look up. Rogan slid into the seat across from her. He was wearing a clean jacket, no bandages in sight. But his eyes still carried the edge of someone who had been on the run too long. "You read it?" he asked. She nodded. "It's everywhere. They can't bury it now." He glanced toward the window, watching the rain. "Mara?" Lena exhaled slowly. No word. But if anyone could disappear for good, it's her. Silence settled between them, comfortable this time. Finally, Rogan reached into his pocket and set something on the table, a small silver pendant. The same circle split by a vertical line that had been etched into the vault's case. "Your mother wanted you to have this. I wasn't ready to give it to you until now." Lena picked it up, feeling the cool weight in her palm. For the first time in months, the ache in her chest eased, just a little. "Thank you," she said. They didn't talk about what came next. The fight was over, but the world beyond the cafe door was still shifting, still dangerous. When they left, they walked together through the rain, not looking back. The vault was gone, Clearwater was broken, and somewhere Lena thought her mother might have been smiling. In the end, the vault was gone, the truth was free, and Lena walked away with the one thing her enemies could never take: her mother's faith in her. Sometimes survival isn't about escaping danger. It's about finding the courage to step into it. If this story moved you, subscribe and stay with us, because there are more truths out there waiting to be found.